where Washington comes to talk. And AM 630.
WMAL. It risks making a mockery of the global prohibition on the use of chemical weapons. It endangers our friends and our partners along Syria's borders, including Israel, Jordan, Turkey, Lebanon, and Iraq. It could lead to escalating use of chemical weapons or their proliferation to terrorist groups who would do our people harm.
Wow, folks, a lot going on today. I'm Dan Bongino. Got a stacked show. They stacked it on us. A lot breaking on the weekend. So we'll be here. We'll be live. We got a ton of guests lined up for you. You're going to love the show today. We got a lot of information to get out there. So I'm Dan Bongino filling in. Give me a follow at DBongino. Send us some questions if you want at WMAL News on Twitter or at DBongino on Syria. We'll be talking about it throughout the day today. So you heard a little piece of the president's speech there that he just gave. Interesting on a Saturday, though, right, folks? You know, they do the document dump Fridays, and then you thought you can't argue this is going to be a major policy speech, correct? We're talking about another potential military intervention in the Middle East that could, by the way, escalate into bigger and badder things, and you give it on Saturday, what was it, about 2:30? Really? I mean, I was driving in listening to it. So, kind of skeptical of that, and with their history of the Friday document dumps, I mean, I don't want to turn this show into a let's take a shot at President Obama's show. You know, if you're going to put any kind of boots on the ground, although he said he wouldn't, I certainly don't support that, but I do support our troops. But, document dump Friday and a speech on Saturday certainly doesn't, he's supposed to be the most transparent administration in American history, right, by his own words? I don't think so. So give us a call, folks, on this issue. Again, we got a lot to talk about. I got a ton of questions I want to pose to you. And these are the best topics because there are no clear answers, right? 888-630-9625. 888-630-9625. So give me a call, Dan Bongino. I'll be here for the next 4 hours. And I'm sure the phone lines are going to light up. And folks, this Syria, potential intervention in Syria here, I think this is going to unite both sides. I think there are conservatives, Tea Party, small government libertarian types, and far left types, anti-war, Occupy Wall Street types, who are just saying the same thing I'm saying. And, let me ask you this question. Here's the big question for me, because I wrote down a few questions that I want to pose to you. 888-630-9625. What is our national security interest here? Now, let's get out of the way right away. One thing we can all agree to from 30,000 feet here. This is a humanitarian disaster. No question about it. The use of chemical weapons on a civilian population is a humanitarian, moral, and ethical crime of historic proportions. No question. I don't think anyone's going to call and dispute that. But that's not the question I'm asking you right now. The question I'm asking you right now is, what is our specific national security interest right now? 888-630-9625. So we played that cut coming into the show, and a couple of things I underlined listening to the president talk. He opened up by saying, referring to the chemical weapons attack in Syria, that is, it risks making a mockery on the global prohibition on the use of chemical weapons. Risks? They've already unleashed the chemical weapons. Is the mockery's already begun, folks? And this, I think, is a testament to some of the president's poor foreign policy decisions. I mean, you cannot set a red line, or nor should you be publicly. When you publicly mention, remember, listen, I was a Secret Service agent for 12 years. I spent 5 to 6 years running around the White House with these, the staff and all the acolytes and the hangers-on. Folks, a simple question. I mean, when you say something publicly as the President of the United States, it is public policy. You cannot set a red line if you don't mean it, because now he's boxed in. 888-630-9625. So again, he opens his statement by saying it risks making a mockery of the prohibition on chemical weapons. They've already made a mockery of a global prohibition. You think Assad cares right now? about global prohibitions on weapons? This guy's desperate. All right, second sentence, he says, it endangers our friends and partners along Syria's border. No question about that. But where are our friends and partners on this? Should they lead? Maybe we can provide intelligence, maybe some training, but personally, Dan Bongino speaking here, boots on the ground for me is an absolute no. We have no record of success to speak from. And, folks, just a personal story. I run around my neighborhood in the morning. It's like a big box. Some of you have heard me on the radio before. I've heard this story. And I pass this gazebo every day, and it's dedicated to a kid we lost in Iraq. He was a kid. I'm not going to give his name. It's not necessary. It doesn't matter for the sake of this. He's never coming back, ever. For what? For what? When I ran for Senate last time, I remember getting into a debate with one of our foreign policy wizards, and I say that term loosely. And when you bring up stories like that, they really don't have an answer. They like to give you some academic, wonkish approach they probably read in a textbook. Listen, I traveled to 27 countries. I was in a war zone with the president. I was the lead advance there. All right, I've seen it. I get it. I remember walking into a gym with the president on a base in Afghanistan. And I remember asking the person in charge of the military unit, why they were meeting with the president. I was just curious. And there were about 20 guys, and forgive me if I may have the numbers off by a few here. But I said, why are you guys meeting with the president? He said, well, there were 26 of us last night. He said the Afghan guide had shot with 5 or 6 of them in the back. This is very real, folks. I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't know. I'm certainly not giving anyone a lecture here, but these are real kids. This is our flesh and blood. So, again, I ask you the question, 888-630-9625. What is our national security interest, the United States, flesh and blood, right now? And how do you know that? I'm not into making statements. Is that what we're going to do, lob a few cruise missiles and say, hey, slap on the wrist? And then I ask you this. If we do that, and the outcome is not as we expected, and Assad survives it, what was the lesson there? Did he not come out of that stronger? How did that help? Folks, these are our kids, and don't just assume that if we lob a few missiles over there, that it doesn't involve putting troops in danger. That's not the case. All right, 888-630-9625. Do we have Russ on? Let's go to Russ in Centerville on line 1. Russ,
hey,
you're on with Dan
morning.
Bongino.
Sorry. Good afternoon.
How are you?
Listen. I know this is going to be a long around explanation, but when we fix Veterans Affairs, where we're going to take care of our veterans when they come back, then we should go into other countries. So the answer is no, because that's probably not going to happen. And my question sometimes is, what's the difference between gassing somebody and starving them to death, or shooting them down in a road or fall into a pit? They're always dead in the end. Right.
Is it Russ? Is that right, Russ?
Yeah.
Okay. Russ, you bring up a perfectly viable question, and let's escape Syria for a second. we've had atrocities in Burma, all over the Middle East. I think you bring up a valid point. I think this is why a war-weary public here is uniting kind of both sides of the political spectrum that's saying, all right, listen, we're not arguing that these are atrocities right now. We're arguing that what's the best outcome for the United States? And I think you bring up a perfectly valid point. What's the difference if you're dead by a bullet or you're dead by gas? Yeah, one may have been a more horrible death, but you're still dead.
Yeah, and that's true. And then the other thing is, how does Idi Amin die of old age in another country? Nobody has really explained that to me other than they have buddies. We're talking about people who have committed crimes. I say if we're going to do anything, we can maybe do an assassination, but I think that we've outlawed that. And as far as the president goes, look, come on, man. You guys in the press, honestly,
right.
You guys don't get it yet. This guy is lazy, and he doesn't care, and he really isn't going to do anything about it.
Well, listen, Russ, I'm not willing to say lazy or he doesn't care. I'm not. But I agree with your point that the press is carrying water right now for the president. This has been to call. I don't even want to call it the president's foreign policy, Russ, because there is no foreign policy. It's total guesswork. It's like he makes it up as he goes along.
Okay, you made my point. You know, most people, I could run the foreign policy better. You could run it better because there isn't one.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, that's called laziness or you don't care.
All right. I stay away from it, Rusto, because I think we should just stick with the policy. Because you know what happens when we get into the personal stuff, then people just tune out, and I don't think we can really positively affect the argument. I think we have enough policy material on the president now to say, hey, this is the wrong way to handle it. So thanks for the call, Russ. I appreciate it. Hey, can we go to cut 4 here? I want to play a cut for you. Listen to this one, folks. More from the president's speech.
After careful deliberation, I have decided that the United States should take military action against Syrian regime targets.
All right, so now let me read that back to you just so we're all clear here. After careful deliberation, I have decided, silence, that the U.S. should take military action against Syrian targets. Now, let's go here to cut, let's see, hold on here. Because this is going to be, here we go, cut 10 here. Let's go to cut 10. The president.
Yet while I believe I have the authority to carry out this military action without specific congressional authorization, I know that the country will be stronger if we take this course, and our actions will be even more effective.
All right. So, first he says, I have decided, and then he alludes to the fact, and he actually says later in the speech, that he is going to seek congressional authorization. So, first question for you folks, what is our U.S. national security interest right now? Second question, should he seek congressional authorization? I don't think we should be there at all, but I do think my answer is yes. I'd like to hear your approach to this. 888-630-9625. Let's go to Chris in Annapolis. Chris, you're on with Dan Bongino. How are you?
Dan, how are you?
I'm doing good. Thanks for calling.
All right. I think I never wanted America to be weak. And so I think that if we're going to show strength, we should do it and do it right. And I think I agree with you. Launching a couple of cruise missiles, stirring up a hornet's nest, and potentially inviting Hezbollah or some of these other terrorist groups to maybe move if they attack one of our embassies, around the world. And what kind of strength is the president going to show to protect our embassies and chancelleries around the world? We saw what happened with Benghazi. So that's a concern for me. And I've always felt we don't react worrying about the reaction, but
right.
With this president, it seems like we have to worry about how is he going to react.
Well, Chris, listen, I agree with you. We have to consider the secondary effects here, but what's the end game to either approach? All right, let's say approach number one is we lob a few cruise missiles in there to so-called make a point, right? One, I see no end game to that. But even the second approach, let's say the president goes to Congress and says, you know what, I've changed my mind, all-out war with Syria. What's the end game there? I mean, if we break it, right, don't we own it?
Right, absolutely. And I don't think he's thought about the end game. I'm no expert. I have no idea. I just know if we're gonna go in there, then I don't see any way of getting in there without having some type of troops or boots on the ground. And I'm not saying that's what America needs right now, but if you're going to get in there and you're going to, attack his chemical, his chemical compounds and make sure that this doesn't happen again, you can't just do that by just airstrikes.
All right, Chris, we got to run. We're headed up against a break, but I appreciate your call. 888-630-9625, folks. Give us a call. I'm Dan Bongino. Filling in here on the weekend. We got a great show lined up. We're going to be talking Syria. What is the U.S.'s national security concern right now? Meat and potatoes, folks. 888-630-9625. Stay tuned.
After careful deliberation, I have decided that the United States should take military action against Syrian regime targets.
All right, he has decided. The great decider. I'm Dan Bongino, filling in here for the next 4 hours. We got a stacked show on Syria, and we got a great guest lineup. We got Eli Lake coming up at 3:40. We got Bill Crystal at 4:06. And on the line now is our good friend, Chris Plant. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, Dan, how are you?
I'm kind of laughing. Well, thank you for letting me fill your quite big shoes last week. I hope I didn't ruin your entire audience.
Oh, No, people are sending me cards and letters telling how great you are. You're better than me.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, thank you. Well, on a more serious note here, so obviously Syria kind of stole the show today, and I've been asking the question to the audience, kind of taking a cue from you. I love when you do that on your show here. What is the U.S. national security interest here in an endgame? I mean, are we just really making a point to use air quotes here by lobbing a few missiles over there? Is there an actual end game, or is this guy just making it up as he goes along, the president?
Well, clearly making it up as we go along at this point. Obviously, today's announcement was a great demonstration of political sleight of hand. The president found himself in a really difficult situation, and he has effectively now thrown the brakes on and passed the buck. Now, look, this was a lose-lose for him this morning when he got out of bed. But now he's thrown it all over to Congress. And as we know in the news media, Congress means Republicans. So if Congress goes with him and authorizes the use of force and it goes bad, then, hey, Congress shares the blame or Congress gets the blame because our Teflon president never takes responsibility for anything. But this is a classic example of not taking responsibility. He was leading. He was fine going around Congress yesterday. Now suddenly he's wrapping himself in the Constitution. And I heard a news report on this earlier, the White House correspondent saying that Barack Obama has seized the moral high ground. Now, this is the new narrative from the Obama worshipers, is that President Obama has made the decision to go ahead and punish the Assad regime in Syria for their dastardly deeds, which, didn't need punishing a year ago when they used chemical weapons, and there are, more than 15 incidents involving the use of chemical weapons in Syria. But this one crossed the line, and the president found himself in a terrible place with, the British Parliament denying David Cameron the authority to take military action for the first time since 1782. Right. That's a hilarious story. And that was the British Parliament denying the then Prime Minister authority to go ahead and keep waging war against those breakaway colonies in America. That's the last time a British Prime Minister was denied by the House of Commons the authority to make war. President Obama was fine yesterday and this morning with going ahead without congressional authorization. Democrats and Republicans are saying, hey, what about us? We have this branches of government thing. Now the president finds it politically convenient to punt it to Congress, to pass the buck, to take the responsibility off of his plate and put it on somebody else's plate. And it also throws the brakes on because Congress isn't due back anytime soon. It looks like they may not come back until, September 9th, and the president will already be back from St. Petersburg and the G20 summit at that point. Right. So it really throws cold water on the whole project. It passes the buck. It's no longer President Obama's responsibility. So it's for him, it's good politics, but once again, it's not leadership.
Well, Chris, I agree with you. And, everything with this administration is politics, and you kind of alluded to it before. But what he does is he owns the language, so he owns the debate because the water carriers and the media just meme the same language. Like, what he does is he carefully inserts into this speech a line about this isn't the time to play politics. And what does he do? He does a Friday document dump. And then, being in the media yourself, Chris, everybody's listening on Saturday at 2:30, of course. That's the perfect time to talk about a potential major military strike against a Middle Eastern enemy right now because everybody's listening. I mean, I cannot get more skeptical about this administration's motives any more than I am right now. The Friday document dump, they have a history of doing it, and the Saturday press conference. And then another thing you alluded to as well, like all of a sudden he's the checks and balances guy, the Constitution. This guy's trampled on the Constitution at every issue. Immigration, Obamacare, he's ignored it. But now all of a sudden when he can pass the political buck, here you go, Congress. It's all for you to eat. How do you think Congress responds to this? There's the question.
Well, that is a great question. And, the reality is it gives President Obama political cover either way, because if Congress gives him the authority to go ahead, then and it comes out well, then he gets all the credit. If it goes badly, then he can, share the blame. Now, if spread the blame around, and of course the newspapers will give the lion's share of it, not to him, but to anybody else in the room that they can point to. And if they don't authorize, if they don't give him the authority to go forward, well then, he wanted to do the moral thing, but those terrible Republicans in Congress wouldn't let him. And of course, it's Democrats and Republicans that are opposing him on this on Capitol Hill. but the news media likes to frame it, in their imaginary world as the, Congress being the Republicans because they control the House of Representatives. But the president he hasn't stepped up to lead. That conference call briefing unclassified to members of Congress. As I understand it, they were ready to pull the trigger on Thursday without Congress, without the United Nations. They were hoping to get a couple of countries in Europe to buy in. They didn't even get that. As Charles Krauthammer, and I mentioned this yesterday too, but as Charles Krauthammer said, I guess on Thursday night, this guy can't organize a 3-car funeral. And honestly, is he going to even try to marshal the votes on Capitol Hill, which he has no experience, no history of doing? Or is he just going to sort of see what happens and then respond accordingly? But the key is that it takes the responsibility away from him. Yesterday, it was exclusively his responsibility. It isn't anymore.
Right, and I'm fascinated to see how the media plays this one. I mean, I can only listen to the 6 o'clock news program tonight, and you'll hear all of these tough guy quotes. And again, he'll be the great arbiter of goodwill here. He'll be they'll flex the biceps. But I have no doubt that this was based on some polling they did internally. My experience with this administration is they don't do anything without public polling. And what I think happened, which I think you hit the nail on the head with, was they were going to go at it alone. They saw the hypocrisy of it, from whether it's from John Kerry or Obama himself. I voted for it before I voted against it, and Biden's quotes where he was totally boxed into a corner, saying how he's talking about potentially impeaching the president for Bush. That is when they went to war, and they had nowhere else to go. It's all politics with these guys, is it not? They never ever. I mean, there's no political North Star, Chris. They just wander around.
I opened the show yesterday with a clip from Animal House when John Belushi tried to rally everybody in Delta House to
I was listening. That was
door.
Terrific, by the way.
Was it over when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor and he went running out the door and no one followed? Well, that was Barack Obama yesterday. He's like, yeah, come on, let's go get the Syrians, and nobody followed. The British didn't follow. The French are saying, classic French, we're with you, but not for military action, maybe for a diplomatic solution. So he's got no NATO support. The UN doesn't want him to do it. The Congress hasn't been consulted. The American people aren't with it. Other than that, Barack Obama's really rallied everyone to the cause.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to the French now, Chris, really? By the way, though, I'm embarrassed to say I've never seen Animal House. Don't tell anyone outside the people listening to this show. But was it Blutarski or something? Was that right?
Yes, it was. Yeah, he eventually became a senator. He became Senator Blutarski in the epilogue of the... You haven't seen Animal House? Were you raised in North Korea or something?
I'm a movie buff, too, which is quite embarrassing. But, I listened to you on iHeartRadio, and it was hysterical because you were absolutely right. Like, the charge was light. He turned around. He realized no one was behind us. And now we're reaching for the French. And, I remember, that joke they used to say where, the French didn't help us get the Iraqis out of Kuwait. That's okay because they didn't help us get the Germans out of France either. But, I mean, is this really where we are right now, that Barack Obama?
It really is where we are. And it's, they mocked the Bush administration for the coalition of the willing, which was at one point 48 nations, and there are always dozens of nations, and there was lots of heavy lifting. President Obama can't get him to stand next to us while we lob our cruise missiles, while we pay the bill, while they just kind of watch and offer moral support and hold our coat as they stand off to the side. And President Obama can't even get him to do that. I mean, I guess he's regretting sending that bust of Winston Churchill back and insulting the British right out of the gate and giving the Queen what did he give her, an iPod with his own speeches on it. And, I guess his international relations are paying off. These are his chickens coming home to roost, as it were, because he doesn't have any friends internationally. He doesn't have any friends in Washington on Capitol Hill. And I mean Democrats or Republicans. And the president has been this lone wolf figure propped up by the news media as Barack the Magnificent. And now here's an opportunity for him to make good on all of his rhetoric. And he's running for the hills. He's slammed the door and passed the buck to Congress, and now he's out of the line of fire, and it's all going to be somebody else's fault because it gives his friends in the media the opportunity to move the spotlight off of him and put it on Congress.
Well, Chris, we got to let you go, but I can't let you go without this one. I got to get you to comment on this. Can you imagine the look on the Queen's face when the old man handed her the iPod? Hey, here you go. Thanks for coming.
Hey.
I mean,
Thank you, Bennett.
she must have been those people who handle all the formalities for that must have been horrified. When I can only imagine. So
Yeah, the protocol office. As I say yesterday, normally the President of the United States would give the Queen of England something like an ornate desk carved out of wood from a tree on George Washington's property.
Right.
Or, an $89 iPod.
Right, same thing, no difference.
Same thing you might give your niece in the Christmas stocking.
Or Bluto Blutarski. Hey, Chris, thanks for taking time out on the weekend. We appreciate it.
You bet, buddy. Have fun, Dan.
Thanks, man. All right, folks, 888-630-9625. Stay tuned. We got Eli Lake coming up. We got Bill Crystal at 406. We're going to talk all things Syria. Do we go in? Do we not go in? Do we lob cruise missiles? Do we not lob cruise missiles? There's so much to talk about. 888-630-9625. Stay tuned.
So to all members of Congress of both parties, I ask you to take this vote for our national security. I am looking forward to the debate. In doing so, I ask you, members of Congress, to consider that some things are more important than partisan differences or the politics of the moment.
The politics of the moment? Folks, color me skeptical here. I'm Dan Bongino. Be here till 7 p today. We got a stacked show for you. Stay tuned, folks. We're talking all things Syria today. The president doesn't want to play politics. Really? I'm stunned. 888-630-9625, folks. Give us a call, 888-630-9625. I would love to hear your perspective on this because I think this now debacle in Syria and this lack of leadership, decision-making is going to unite folks on both sides of the spectrum. I don't think it'll unite the media, though. I'm relatively confident the media will paint this as some fantastic decision-making by President Obama, no matter what. It just seems to be the man can make no mistakes. It's really incredible, folks. So you heard our opening soundbite there, our cut. And let me just read back to you one of the lines here. So he's asking members of Congress of both parties to take this vote for our national security. Okay, well, I have a question about that, number one. Is this really our national security interest right now? Again, I'm not debating it's a humanitarian disaster. I'm just saying, folks, what is our specific meat and potatoes national security interest? Well, on the line to talk about it, we have our good friend Eli Lake, the senior national security correspondent for the Daily Beast. You can follow Eli on Twitter at Eli, E-L-I Lake, like swim in the lake. Give him a follow on Twitter, folks. And Eli, thanks for coming on. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, so listen, there's no better person to talk about this than you. I've been reading your Twitter feed during the break, and one of your tweets here, again, you can follow Eli Lake at Eli Lake on Twitter. Shorter Obama, I made a decision to strike Syria. I have the authority to just do it, but I'm asking Congress and the UN because I'm Obama. I think that pretty much sums it up. He's the great decision maker who really just punted to Congress, did he not?
Obama is so decisive, he didn't just make one decision, he made two.
It's incredible.
What we just heard is a speech where he said, I've decided to strike Syria, and I've decided that I can decide alone to strike Syria, but I haven't decided yet.
Right.
And it was filled with nuance and legalism, and in some ways, I think that you have to credit Obama because there was no case I really heard from anybody about how a limited, no boots on the ground strike would be a significant enough deterrence really to Assad, which is the reason why Obama believes there should be military action in Syria, which is to discourage all of the other dictators and terrorists from ever using chemical weapons again, which is a worthy goal and I think one that you can justify. The problem is he's unwilling to authorize the significant commitment of force necessary and responsibility for Syria afterwards that would be required to really provide that deterrence. Instead, he talks about degrading to some degree the capability of Syria to launch these mass atrocities again, which is undermining the basic reason for why you would want military action, except he doesn't want to go that far.
I mean, this guy, we're talking to Eli Lake, at Eli Lake on Twitter, from the Daily Beast. Eli, this guy, the president, is a political genius. It is absolutely amazing the pretzels he ties himself in to avoid any significant decision-making whatsoever. And I think the grander problem here, we just had Chris Plant on before talking about, is the media water carriers for this guy cover for him no matter what. I mean, if this was a Republican president, this guy there would be a public execution right now. I mean, this would be horrifying, the press coverage. But you're right. He made a decision, punched the football to Congress. Now, my question to you is, what does Congress do? Aren't they boxed in? I mean, how do they even respond to this? How do you see it proceeding?
Well, you got your libertarians and the Rand Paul types in the Republican Party who clearly think there's no national interest here. It'll be interesting to see if that wing of the party can constrain itself and not go off under kind of rabbit holes and tangents without the evidence, because I think, forget what the intelligence community says, and I understand everybody's skeptical after Iraq and WMD, but there's so much. There was clearly a chemical weapons attack based on what all the videos you can see on YouTube, what all these doctors are telling, the reports on the ground at the time. To a certain extent, I mean, I would predict that you would find at least the UN saying there was a chemical attack. And then the question is, what is more likely? It seems that, you'd have to really present a lot more evidence that it was a rebel attack as opposed to a false flag, as opposed to the regime. So that's one thing. But then there's the rest of the Republican Party that doesn't believe that the executive should be restrained. That is the Cheney, Rumsfeld, Bush line, for many years. It's also a view that Reagan and George H.W. Bush, espoused. And almost all modern presidents end up taking the view, as Obama just did now, that they have the authority to conduct these kinds of limited airstrike sorts of things. Nixon used to call it police actions.
Right.
These are things that are military actions short of all-in war. And modern presidents have always said that they can do that. And it goes, so in that sense, Obama's asserting that that's how he views the Constitution, even though he didn't say it when he was a senator, but I'm going to go to Congress anyway. It's just terribly confusing.
We're talking to Eli Lake, at Eli Lake on Twitter, senior national security correspondent for the Daily Beast. Eli, here's a question to you here from a 30,000-foot perspective. Are we viewing this too simplistically as kind of a right or wrong when we should be viewing it from a not what's the right decision, but what's the less wrong decision? And what I'm getting at is, are we even sure? Say we lob cruise missiles in there, and say it takes out Assad. Assad and his little cabal of cronies, and we kill him. I mean, who's in charge? I mean, are we going to have another Egypt where we trade a despot for even worse despots in the Muslim Brotherhood? I mean, who are we really helping here?
Well, I mean, you have a problem, which is that, the fighters for al-Nusra, which is the al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, are more ferocious, probably better disciplined, do not, I think, represent a majority of Syrians by any stretch, but certainly are in a position, in the absence of anybody else, to be the most powerful force within Assad's opposition. And so if Assad goes down, you would presumably have some sort of coalition that might probably include al-Qaeda. That's not in America's best interest. But then Assad is in bed with the Iranians. That's not in America's best interest. But I think here, the humanitarian choice would be to have some super coalition and the world kind of invade Syria and rebuild it like they rebuilt Serbia after the fall of Milosevic, although that didn't happen because of a military invasion. And they went in and stopped him in Kosovo, and like you saw efforts in Iraq and Afghanistan to rebuild those countries. But the American people don't want to do any more of this nation building.
Yeah, well, so I'm glad you brought that up, Eli.
I think, what he wants to accomplish, deter Assad, requires a kind of Bushian nation-building war plan, which he will never deliver.
We're talking to Eli Lake, senior national security correspondent for the Daily Beast. Follow him on Twitter, at Eli Lake. You bring up a great question there that I've been thinking about for eons here. Is Syria even ready right now for any form of democratically ruled government? It's a question asked quite frequently around the region, and I don't make that as a qualitative statement or judging anyone. But is the region in and of itself, Syria specifically, for this, obviously because of what's going on today, are they even ready for democracy if we handed it to them on a silver platter?
Well, that's a deep question. I believe the Syrian people, I believe the Lebanese people, the Jordanian people, I'm a universalist. I think that they want the same freedoms that we enjoy in the West, and that there are plenty of them who do want that. But of course, the problem is that there are so many established, violent, and often fanatic groups in the region that are the direct threat to having the kind of, young democratic society that we want, which is to say, Al-Qaeda and other extremist fanatic militias exist right now all over the region. They are organized, and they are not interested in any kind of democratic experiment. So as long as they are participating and intimidating and subverting any kind of process like that, then I think that the chances for success there are slim.
Eli, thank you so much for taking the time on the weekend. I know your commentary and your expertise in this are in high demand, so I really appreciate it.
I see myself more as a reporter, so I don't like to predict too much, but yeah, it's a good question.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for coming on. Again, I know you're in high demand today, so I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Eli.
Okay.
All right, folks, that was Eli Lake. You can follow him on Twitter at Eli Lake, senior national security. Try that, saying that a couple times. You think I was chewing on a pretzel. Senior national security correspondent for the Daily Beast. We've got a great show coming up for you, folks. We got a lot of guests. We got Bill Crystal coming up. We had Chris Plant on before. Again, that was Eli Lake. We're going to be talking Syria. Give us a call, 888-630-9625, 888-630-9625. We got John on the line, so hold on, John. We'll get to you. And I'd love to hear your perspective. What's our national security interest? Is there? Go in, go out, cruise missiles, no boots on the ground from my perspective. 888-630-9625. Stay tuned.
Where Washington comes to talk.
Thank you so much for opening my eyes.
105.9 FM and AM 630. Washington's Mall. WMAL.
But we are the United States of America. And we cannot and must not turn a blind eye to what happened in Damascus.
All right, welcome back, folks. I'm Dan Bongino. You can give me a follow on Twitter at DBongino. If you want to ask us any questions about Syria, you can tweet me or you can call in 888-630-9625. So, the president said we cannot turn a blind eye. Well, I'm not suggesting that we do turn a blind eye, but is turning to look at something and doing something two completely different arguments. All right, we got a lot of calls on this, 888-630-9625. Let's go to John. John's been waiting a while. John, what do you have for us?
Listen, there's one option I wish they would explore further.
Okay.
And that is that if they can, we get together with the Russians. The Russians are friends of the Assad regime. And we say the United States will not attack you if you turn over all your known stockpiles of chemical weapons to them,
right,
which they will then hold or hopefully destroy. The only other ones that could possibly be out there would be the ones that the rebels so-called stole or have, because we could attack them with cruise missiles, and then the rebels could come out and use them again, and then we would be saying, well, who used them that time?
Right. Well, John, my issue with that is Assad has shown no evidence of sanity whatsoever. Why cutting a deal with a despot right now, a desperate despot, say that quick a couple times, is highly unlikely.
That the world could, then we could say in the face of the world, see, we tried the option, the rational option, and there was no rational option. We should at least give it a try.
Well, John, listen, I appreciate the call. Thank you very much. Interesting approach, but I don't think the Russians are in any rush to cooperate with us either. Let's go to Bridget. Bridget in Maryland. Hey, Bridget, welcome to the show. What do you have for us?
Hey, I'm so pleased to talk to you. I started following you on Facebook last week.
Oh, thank you, Bridget. I like Facebook. I write my own stuff. I'm kind of like Jackie Chan doing his own stunts, but I don't do stunts. I just write. So what do you have for us today? What do you think about this Syria situation? What's your approach?
I really am grateful that he is going to consult Congress.
Well, me too. But do you think he's passing the buck by doing that? Because he wasn't so willing to do that last week and some of the public and not so public stances they had taken on it.
Well, he's a really great lawyer, He's a lousy president.
Right. Yeah, I'll tell you, that is. Can I take a note on that footnote, Bridget? He's a really great lawyer. I'm going to use that throughout this show. Well said. I said before, he's a political genius. The guy's a mastermind. One, I don't agree with an intervention in Syria right now. We don't know who the enemy is. We don't know if we even have a friend. We don't know what the outcome's going to be. But, and here's the but, if you were going to do that, I'm with you that he should constitutionally go to Congress, although it's been ignored for decades now. So I agree with you, but you just said it, Bridget. He is. He's one of the best lawyers. This man has mastered the language like no president I've ever seen before, right?
Oh, and, I was very involved. I was working at Walter Reed in the last war. And, our economy is so bad right now. We cannot afford to go in and rebuild another nation.
No, we can't. Well, Bridget, thanks for the call. Thanks for following me on Facebook. I appreciate that. You put a smile on my face there. All right, 888-630-9625, 888-630-9625. We got Bill Crystal coming up at 4:06, folks. We're going to take a few more calls before we get off here. We got KT McFarland coming up at 4:40, so definitely stay tuned. But let's go to Adam in VA, otherwise known as Virginia. Adam, what do you have for us?
Hey, how you doing? Great show today.
Hey, thank you.
I was calling because I really believe that unless you go after Assad himself, he will never care about what you do to his helicopters, his planes, his airfield. You can't get all the WMD, or the chemical weapons or bioweapons. It's impossible.
Right.
And no matter how big the coalition, you're never going to go in there with boots on the ground, no matter if it's 5 years from now, after multiple chem uses, because of the reprisal attacks on Israel from Iran, Hezbollah. They will take far more of the brunt of this war than we would with blood and treasure.
Right, and Adam, why does it always have to? Why is our military, our kids, our men and women, the real flesh and blood, real kids, some of them who are never going to come home? Why are we the world's police force? Are we the only nation in the world that has an interest in Assad not using chemical weapons? Why does it always have to be the United States? I mean, you can't say, well, that's too simple of a question. No, it's not too simple of a question. It's a very real. Why does it have to be us?
Well, I mean, Mr. Obama did dig himself into a hole when he said, use chem weapons. We see it on the news. We're going to have to do something about it.
Right. And I mean, wasn't that an amateurish statement to me? I mean, did he not realize it when the president speaks that it's official public policy, whether he declares it official or not?
Well, I think he thought Assad probably took him at his word and said, I better not do this or else I'm going to get T-Lam on my palace. However...
Hey, Adam, I'm up against a break, so I got to run. I'm going to fit in one more call before the break. Let's go to Nick in Alexandria. Nick, you got to make it quick. We got a couple of seconds for you here. What do you got for us?
I'm calling from the land of liberals, Delray. 20-year Air Force retired. I'm in the defense industry right now, so it would benefit us. But I say don't do it because exactly what you're saying. We don't know who's going to take over. In fact, we probably do know who's going to take over. It's probably going to be the Brotherhood, and we don't want to expend anything to let
Nick,
that happen.
I got to run. I'm up against a hard break, Nick, but thank you for the call. And Nick, I'm with you. Thanks for calling, folks. Stay tuned. We got Bill Crystal coming up.
Where Washington comes to talk. And AM 630.
Yesterday, the United States presented a powerful case that the Syrian government was responsible for this attack on its own people. Our intelligence shows the Assad regime and its forces preparing to use chemical weapons, launching rockets in the highly populated suburbs of Damascus, and acknowledging that a chemical weapons attack took place. And all of this corroborates what the world can plainly see.
All right, welcome back, folks. I'm Dan Bongino, here with you till 7 p, covering all things Syria today. Busy weekend, didn't expect that. I was driving in, and the president decided he was going to give a press conference on a Saturday. It's not really a press conference, kind of like a speech to a few people. On a Saturday, after a document dump on Friday, there was no other time to do this. It's a very important situation, Mr. President. I think you should do a briefing that people will actually hear. Labor Day weekend, too. That even adds to it. I mean, is this a political decision to do that? All right, folks. Again, I'm Dan Bongino. Give us a call on Syria, 888-630-9625. I've got a ton of questions to pose to you, and the answers I don't think are clear, and they always make for the best topics to talk about. I mean, what is our immediate national security interest? What? president said, well, they're going to make a mockery of the international ban on chemical weapons. Have they already made a mockery? And then after you just heard that opening clip there, all of this collaborates with the world can plainly see. Well, can we plainly see it? I mean, are you convinced? On the line now, we are lucky enough to have Bill Kristol, and we're going to talk with Bill Kristol. He has an interesting piece he quotes today. I'm just looking at it here in Weekly Standard, a twofold task. So, Mr. Kristol, thank you very much for your time in the weekend here. We appreciate it.
Good to be with you. How are you?
Very good, very good. So the first question I have for you is, I listened to John Kerry's briefing last week, and I thought the briefing was relatively conclusive, but, you know, are we sure that this was absolutely Assad, or is this still an open question given some of our prior intelligence debacles, which the world community is always happy, by the way, to throw in our faces?
We seem to be pretty sure, and he's used them before, and in any case, he's managed to kill tens of thousands of his fellow citizens, and I do think it's in our strategic interest to remove him. My main concern is that we will do too little, not that we're going to do too much. But I actually think, unlike many of my fellow conservatives probably, I actually think the president might have done the right thing today. Maybe he sort of backed into it almost by mistake, but if we are going to use force, we should get a congressional authorization if there's time, and there is time. I don't know that it's constitutionally necessary exactly, but it's wise to do. Bush did it in 1991 in the first Gulf War. Bush did it again, obviously, for Iraq. So I think it's a healthy debate. And, you know, the questions you were just raising on the air, let's debate them in the country for the next week. Let's debate them in Congress for the week after that. That's the way a constitutional democracy is supposed to work.
Right. Well, I don't disagree with you, but isn't this the time to call back the Congress for a decision so potentially grave? I mean, I'm watching live TV, probably as you are right now in studio. We came down the hall. We were just, everything just happened so quickly. September 9th, I mean, if it's such a grave decision that you felt the need to do a Saturday press conference, which is, having been in the media a whole lot longer than I have, was probably not the best time. Why not call them back immediately then, and let's do this deliberative process where we can come to an agreed upon conclusion?
Yeah, no, I mean, I would have called them back, I think, maybe last week. I guess this week is Monday, the holiday, and then Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year's Thursday, and some members wouldn't be able to be there. And so I guess maybe, look, once you've given up the surprise, which unfortunately I think we did give up by not acting very quickly, Assad has moved all of the stuff around. I'm worried about that in terms of the actual military effectiveness of a strike. But anyway, that's happened already, and presumably nothing much will happen over the next week that would make a strike less effective. So maybe it's, I assume we discussed this with Boehner and Reid and McConnell, and maybe they just decided that it was better to stick to the regular schedule.
Well, one of the things he said, we're talking to Bill Kristol, by the way, and you can read his piece in the Weekly Standard called A Twofold Task. I think it lays it out succinctly and nicely, the dilemma we're in now. But one thing the president said in the briefing, which I found a little bit disturbing, when I was in the Secret Service, Bill, we had this thing with the staff where nothing was ever time sensitive, and it seemed to me to be kind of a ridiculous statement. Everything in security, combat, or wars, everything is time sensitive. Information's a commodity. The longer it sits out there, the commodity has a better chance of being taken or spent. So he said, well, Martin Dempsey, of course, who's our one of the leading military officials he's going to deal with every single day, given his rank, said it's not a time-sensitive situation. I mean, that speaks to almost a political statement or extreme naivete. Not time-sensitive. That's insane.
That's a little odd. I think he means presumably you don't have to do something the next hour or two, and that's why you have to, or a day or two, and that's why you have time to go to Congress. Look, I wish he had more of a sense of urgency about this. I wish he could stop saying, oh, we're so weary of war, and this is so difficult. And, if we're going to do it, let's do it. And I agree, let's do it faster rather than slower. And if Congress is going to act, I'd much prefer that he had called them back for this week, and then we would perhaps be in a position we would have had the national debate already. Having said all that, he's the president we have, and I think given what might have been the two other ways he would have gone, which were to do nothing, which I think would have been very bad, or to act in a really silly little sort of slap on the wrist way and then say, okay, I did my thing. At least now we do get a chance to really seriously discuss what's in our national interest, what the implications of this are beyond Syria, why it is in our national interest, and I think it is, to act. But I think if it's in our national interest, it's in our interest to act decisively and really to go after the regime, to really weaken Assad enough that he may fall, and in any case is really deterred from doing anything like this again, not just a kind of little symbolic slap on the wrist. So anyway, I actually think this debate will be kind of interesting for the country.
We're talking to Bill Kristol, and we do appreciate your time in the weekend. I know you're busy. Well, you brought up an interesting point here, too. Now, I tend to lean along with the libertarian wing of the party, and when your name came up in our pre-show, I said, oh, terrific, because I really wanted to get your perspective, and I almost want to be convinced, but given the three options you just laid out right now, which would be doing nothing, at least publicly. We can there's always things behind the scenes that are happening, of course. Second being a slap on the wrist, or, cruise missile strike, emulating the Clinton policy against bin Laden. And the third option, which, just from your prior statement, I'm assuming you're supporting strong and decisive action, which I'm just reading in your piece. When you say strong and decisive action, and I'm not asking you to military hotwash this right now, but are you talking boots on the ground? I mean, what kind of involvement are we talking? And what's the potential end game there?
I mean, I'm talking something more. No, not boots on the ground. I don't think it's necessary. I don't like it when presidents, though, rule that out entirely. But you just never know what's going to happen. What if chemical weapons get loose somewhere? I don't, object in principle to. We may just have responsibility, especially if we've initiated action from the air. To go in. So I don't like sort of trying to pander to the American people and say, oh, don't worry, there's no chance any American can get hurt. That's just not responsible. I do think that the threat is serious enough that it's worth, a major U.S. military commitment. And, we've done the bombing campaigns before in the Balkans. And actually Clinton did it in 98 against Saddam Hussein, a 4-day campaign, which probably did really degrade his weapons of mass destruction. We didn't realize actually how much it had degraded, but when we went to war in 2003. So, as you say, it's to second guess the military, to write down exactly how to do the military action. I wish he would say that we want to get rid of Assad. What comes after Assad could be problematic, no doubt. But leaving a guy in power who's got the decider of a civil war with 100,000 dead, who's killed his own citizens with chemical weapons, who's an Iranian proxy, and Iran's building nuclear weapons, leaving that guy in power, that's really bad, I think, for the Middle East, bad for our allies there, bad for us. And so I would prefer to go for regime change against Assad. It doesn't mean he has to go next week, but weaken him enough, as we did with Milosevic in the Balkans, that he goes. And then I think, it's still going to be a mess, but I think it will be a better mess than it will be if he stays.
Well, we're talking to Bill Kristol from the Weekly Standard. Give us a call, folks, 888-630-9625. We're going to stick on this topic for the entire show today, Syria. My issue there is with the failure in Egypt, and I think, whatever side you lie on the political spectrum, libertarian, conservative, liberal, or moderate, I think we can all agree Egypt did not work out as we had initially intended. I mean, we essentially traded one despot, Mubarak, but kind of he was our SOB, one of those approaches, for a Muslim Brotherhood, which worked out obviously poorly given the outcome. And my fear here, Mr. Kristol, is that if we are to say Assad becomes a casualty of a strike, in that power vacuum with al-Nusra and these al-Qaeda affiliates, does it just open it up to another situation, actually even worse? I mean, I think Egypt at least had some political architecture in place with their military to establish some sanity. My fear in Syria is you just have utter anarchy and chaos, with, unfortunately, the terrorists being the most organized.
Look, I think it's a legitimate question. It's one of those things we need to debate for the next week. I think there's been convincing arguments that, if we'd done this a year or two ago, the al-Qaeda-backed forces would have been much weaker. I think there was a genuine, decent position to our side. It's probably gotten relatively weaker. It's still there, and I think they could be helped to prevail. And I think it's unlikely, from people I've talked to in the region, quite unlikely, really, that a real al-Qaeda-type regime would take over. Obviously, we might have to act to prevent that, too. But, life's full of these tough choices, and letting it get to this position has let us get into a very, given us a choice of very problematic outcomes. I still think leading in there is the worst outcome. And especially given what the president has said about the red lines and all that, the damage to U.S. credibility and the degree to which it would just be a huge victory for our enemies, and that really makes me think that whole part of the world would have repercussions way beyond Syria. So I'm a hawk on this. But you know what? I say this sincerely. I have my views, and I have them pretty strongly. But we probably have had, in a way, this administration so scared to take on any of the foreign policy debates that they do things. They do them quickly and sort of, almost surreptitiously and apologetically, and then kind of pretend, okay, but don't worry, the tide of war is receding, no problem. Let's have a real debate about what we have to do in the world. And there'll be libertarians, there'll be people like Rand Paul who say, no, get involved, it's a horrible mess. And there'll be people like me who say, no, I think it's more of a mess if we do get involved. This actually could be a good moment for the country to have this debate in a pretty serious way.
Well, we're talking to Bill Kristol. One question I have for you, and we'll let you go. I know you're busy today. With Congress not in session, hearing from your constituents, you're out there pressing the flesh face to face. They're not just calling your D.C. office. And I think we can both agree a war-weary public, excuse me, I can't get that out, war-weary public out there. How do you think Congress reacts? I mean, what's the next step? The politics of this right now are awful.
I think right now, if you did a snapshot vote right now, I suspect people would be inclined to vote no. But I think after a week of debate, there'll be a little bit of sobriety and kind of a sense of, it's not fun, it's not nice, people are weary. But, even if you're weary of things, sometimes you got to suck it up and do the right thing. And I honestly think it'll be interesting to see where the public is a week from now. I guess if I had to bet, I will bet in a contrarian way, I'm sure people would give me odds on this, that Congress will end up voting to authorize the use of force. But I agree, right now it looks like the votes it looks like it would go the other way.
Yeah, when you're hearing from those constituents up in your face and they're pointing fingers, it's ugly. So thank you so much for your time. Again, I know you're in high demand today. So Bill Kristol, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Hey, my pleasure. Be well.
Yeah. Well, folks, there you heard it. I tend to disagree, but he makes a case for his position. I disagree. I just don't think that right now that our end game is clear, and my fear is that when we put our guys in the line of danger and our women out there, that there are very serious consequences, and sometimes the externalities of our decisions are very difficult. But I encourage you to look up Bill Kristol's piece. It's interesting. I mean, you have to hear both sides, folks. The Weekly Standard today, a twofold task, and he makes his case, and I think I'll continue to make ours. We have a stacked show coming up. Let me lay out the guests for you, because they're coming in fast and furious, folks. It's going to be a great show. We have Major General Bob Scales coming up, 4:40. Stay tuned for that. We have KT McFarland, who's terrific. She's coming up. She's coming up at 4:40. Major Bob Scales coming up at 4:25, and then at 5:05 we have Mario Mancuso, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Bush 43 administration. So we got some calls on the line. We'll try to take them. Nick, hold on. Tom, John in Maryland. We will get to you. 888-630-9625. 888-630-9625. I'm Dan Bongino. We're talking Syria. Give us a call. I want to hear your perspective, folks. It's your country. Take it back.
Washington's Mall, WMAL, where Washington comes to talk. Mornings on the Mall, weekdays 5 till 9 on Washington's Mall, WMAL, where Washington comes to talk.
All right, welcome back, folks. I'm Dan Bongino, here till 7 p, talking all things Syria. Busy news weekend. It's working out this morning. Hey, get in there. We got some breaking news. I didn't speed, I promise. I obeyed the speed limit at all times. Again, I'm Dan Bongino with you till 7 p. We're talking Syria, 888-630-9625. We've had some terrific guests. We had Eli Lake, we had Chris Plant, Bill Kristol, we have KT McFarland coming up. But right now, we have Major General Bob Scales. General, thank you for coming on, sir. Again, I know you're in high demand this weekend.
Well, thank you very much, Dan. I appreciate the call.
You're very welcome. Do you have the bat phone next to you waiting for all of these calls when situations like this break?
This is the darndest thing. If someone would have asked me prior to the president, or told me prior to the president's speech that he was going to ask permission from Congress to do this, I would have called him a fool. Well, guess what?
I'll tell you, I'm with you. I was stunned. I mean, I was listening to the speech literally on the way in, and remember, he didn't say that until the end of the speech, and I'm thinking,
that's what's amazing. I
almost choked on I was eating a pretzel at the time. I almost choked on the pretzel. So I'm stunned by this. I think a lot of this is politics, and I asked Bill Kristol, Eli Lake, and I'll ask you as well, with the public fatiguing quickly of international military engagements. I don't think anybody's questioning that right now. And Congress not in session, back in their districts, hearing it from the constituents. Now that the president's punted, what happens?
Well, honestly, in the long term, I think not much. First of all, I can't imagine Congress authorizing this after all we've been through. And secondly, any strike that Charles Schottheimer called a pinprick, after 9 more days of playing, hide the rocket launchers, I think that it'll do probably less than a pinprick if it does go down. And I think whether it goes down or it doesn't go down, I think right now the United States looks kind of foolish.
Well, we're talking to Major General Bob Scales, retired U.S. Army Major General and Fox News military analyst. General, no better person to answer this question than you, given your incredible resume. I'm actually taking a look at it now. It goes on and on. We had to print up 2 pieces of paper. I'm very impressed. So, but Martin Dempsey, apparently, General Dempsey, had told the president, as he said in his speech, that this this operation wouldn't be time sensitive. Now, I was not a military major general like yourself, but having been a Secret Service agent for well over a decade, involved in many international operations in coordination with DoD. Everything in the security or combat operations front is time sensitive, is it not? That seems to me like
of course.
A little bit of a political statement.
What's the most precious commodity in warfare? I'll give you a little War College 101. It's time.
Right.
And time and the side that makes the most of time is the side that usually wins. And remember now, what we're missing in this analysis is that the enemy has a vote. And when you give the Syrian army the gift of 10 days, I would suspect they're going to use it. I've heard media reports here in Fox News that the Syrian army has already started shelling in Damascus again. I mean, they're not waiting for anyone to turn them back. They're back to killing their own people. So if the purpose of a cruise missile strike is to strike static fixed targets, and if those targets have to be identified by overhead surveillance, then there's a dwell time, a sort of flash to bang time between target location and the settings, the computer settings on a missile, and that oftentimes stretches into hours. Well, if you add that to a figure of something like 9 or 10 days, then the Syrians are playing a game of chess, moving pieces around the board, hiding them here and there, and our poor targeteers are trying to catch up with this. And as I said, when time is on the enemy's side, sure, a strike we deliver in 10 days will be as explosive as a strike that we deliver tomorrow. But when you give the enemy 10 days, right, the enemy reacts.
We're talking to Major General Bob Scales, who was gracious enough to join us today, retired U.S. Army Major General and Fox News military analyst. General, we're talking about the time-sensitive nature of this, contrary to the president's statements that it wasn't time-sensitive. And it makes me think of the Israeli strike in Syria, taking out their nuclear reactor. We've given up so much information in advance, and now the president's made a publicly, I think, ridiculous statement that it's not time-sensitive. I mean, shouldn't he take a lesson from the Israelis that if you're going to do it, then do it or don't do it. But don't broadcast the entire operation to the entire world on the 24-hour news cycles. This is absurd.
Yeah, I think the word that I've heard thrown about here is amateur hour. And I know that my friends in the Pentagon are just writhing in pain over this. They're embarrassed. They are running for they're running for the shadows, trying to get away from this. And I know that many of my friends on active duty are tortured by this whole. It's not just this decision, right, Dan. It's the whole decision-making process over the last, 2 or 3 weeks that I find so clunky and amateurish. Good grief. If you're going to go to war, go to war. If you're going to go to war, then try to achieve some strategic object that plays to the national interests of the United States. Don't just thump the enemy for revenge or for retaliation or retribution or whatever word you want to use. If you go to war, you go to war for victory, not just for effect.
I could not agree more. We're talking to Major General Bob Scales, retired U.S. Army Major General. Sir, of the 3 options, we had Bill Kristol on before, and we kind of narrowed it down to doing nothing. And when I say nothing, we don't mean nothing in the sense of zero or the lack of value. We mean nothing openly. Intelligence operations, maybe some joint training, some sharing of information, maybe some support of our friends in the region behind the scenes. So that would be number 1, the nothing with air quotes. The second option being this slap on the wrist, the old Bill Clinton cruise missile lob into town, which really does absolutely nothing, in my opinion. And the third option being Mr. Kristol seemed to support what he called strong and decisive action, but no boots on the ground. I can tell you where I stand. I stand right now with the let's not do anything option until we're absolutely sure. Let's maybe buttress our friends overseas and work on some intel operations. Where do you stand on this? I mean, I don't see the third option being any good.
Yeah, okay, let me give you a fourth. Here's a statistic for you.
Okay.
It takes about 2,000 tons of material a day to sustain an Army light division in heavy combat. We've probably given the Syrian resistance less than 100 tons of material over the last 2 years. If you want this to go right, then we need to start funneling material, trainers. We need to establish training camps in Jordan like we've done in other countries. We need to load these guys up with anti-tank and anti-aircraft guided missiles. We need to give them hundreds of tons of ammunition. We need to perhaps give them mortars and artillery. There are all sorts of things that we can do to make the resistance a credible fighting force and let them do the fighting for us. But if I were a rebel sitting on the border with Jordan right now, listening to the radio or watching television, and I heard that the President of the United States says, well, no, I don't think we're going to do this right now, that actually wouldn't work to give me confidence that sticking with the rebellion is in my family's best interest. And so the second and third order effects of all this is going to depress the resistance, embolden the Syrian army, and make our friends and neighbors in the region, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and even Israel, think twice about supporting us when we push our agendas in the region.
We're talking to Major General Bob Scales, retired U.S. Army Major General. Sir, I got one more question for you. We'll let you go again. I know you're busy here. But do we run the risk, if we were to take that fourth option of supplying heavily the rebel force, do we run a risk of another Afghanistan-type proxy war with the Russians supplying anti-ship and, surface-to-air missiles allegedly to the Syrian government? Do we run that risk again of what's a cold behind-the-scenes war becoming an open proxy war?
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, if you cut away the BS in the media,
right,
we're sort of in a proxy war with the Russians right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't think there'd be greater risk of a proxy war if you have 2, 3, 4 Russian ships in 10 days cruising around the eastern Mediterranean, while 4 or 5 of our ships launch cruise missiles against their allies in Syria. This has been a proxy war between Russia, Iran, to some extent China, for 2.5 years. My view is if you want to win, you side with the side who's on your side. And I think we've just failed to do that, at least to the extent that we could, and I don't understand why we haven't.
Well, sir, thank you so much for your time. We're talking to Major General Bob Scales. I really appreciate it. I know you're busy. That was an incredible perspective. I was sitting here taking notes as you were talking. There's so many questions. I could have kept you on for another 2 hours, but thanks for your time, and keep that bat phone right next to you. You're going to be in high demand this weekend.
Okay, Dan, thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. That was Major General Bob Scales. Incredible perspective, folks. We've had some great guests for you.
We would not put boots on the ground. Instead, our action would be designed to be limited in duration and scope.
Wow, Mr. President, thank you for laying out all of the options, limiting yourself, punting, and then advertising your attack plan to the enemies. I don't even know where to start, folks, with this. I'm Dan Bongino. I'll be here till 7 p.m., 888-630-9625. We've had a great show so far. We've had some great guests. We had Bill Crystal, we had Eli Lake, Chris Plant, Major General Bob Scales, and now we have my friend KT McFarland, who I just saw on live TV. And did you run out of the studio and just jam the cell phone in your ear, KT?
Dan, I would do anything to be on with you.
You're the best. Well, I think the last time we spoke, we were doing a piece on Hannity on the NSA, and we came to some agreement there in the end, which I always appreciate. So you are the Fox News national security analyst, and a host of FoxNews.com's DEF CON 3 show, 1 p.m. on Wednesdays at FoxNews.com. Thank you so much. I can only imagine your bat phone is ringing off the hook as well today.
Yeah.
Well,
exactly.
Starting out with that clip we had, and I'll just sum it up for you. The president says, well, we will not put boots on the ground. Instead, our action will be designed to be limited in duration and scope. KT, I mean, is he not advertising now? First, he didn't make a decision. He punted to Congress. Secondly, he's already limiting his options. And third, is he not advertising the attack plan? I mean, where am I going wrong here?
This is totally amateur hour. And the tragedy is every administration I've been part of, when a president acts, he's got a lot of different audiences. He's got the U.S. domestic audience. He's got the international audience. And in this case, I think Obama decided he had a get-out-of-jail-free card, and he's going to punt to Congress and let Congress make the decision. The president, between saying 2 years ago, Assad's got to go, and saying a year ago, there's a red line for Assad's chemical weapons, and then Assad calling his bluff in both cases, the president was sort of stuck out there on the limb of having to take some kind of military action, even though his military were telling him, look, it's going to be tough. You're not going to be successful. You don't want to put boots on the ground. That'll be a long, prolonged third Middle East war that you don't want to get into. And any kind of limited strike will probably neither deter nor punish Assad, which is what President Obama's goals were. So I think the president was sort of casting about thinking, yikes, how do I get out of this mess? And because the British Parliament voted to not support any kind of British military action, I think President Obama thought, right, that's what I'll do. I'll turn it over to Congress, knowing that Congress is probably going to say no. And then President Obama can say, well, I wanted to. I have the moral high ground. Congress wouldn't let me. And that may get him out of jail free in the U.S. domestic sense, and it may get him out of a war that he probably was going to go into and not be successful. The problem is he just looks like he's all sound and flurry and nothing to back it up. It's one thing when you make a threat and then carry it out, but it's quite another if you make a threat and don't.
All right, we're talking to KT McFarland, Fox News national security analyst. KT, do we run the risk here with the Russians, I think, clearly thinking the president right now is a laughing stock? I mean, he's embarrassed himself from the reset button on, which wasn't even reset in Russian. God knows what it says, what it said in Russian at that point. But thinking he's not the most credible with his word and his foreign policy, do we run the risk here, and I posed this to General Bob Scales before, of a proxy war here with the Russians, given that we already know they're supplying the Syrian regime with heavy weapons, surface to ship missile, surface to air missiles. Do we run this risk? I mean, clearly Putin has no respect for the president.
That's right. Let me just give you an example of how the president and Putin get along. They were at a G8 summit earlier in the summer, and both Putin and Obama wanted to use the same gym in Dublin. Apparently there's only one good gym in Dublin. And so they couldn't share. So it was going to be one or the other, and somehow President Obama got dibs on the gym. So there's no place for Putin to work out. So Putin, not to be outsmarted or outdone, decides he's going to one-up Obama. And so he goes to the press corps and says, follow me. They went to a icy Dublin lake. Putin jumps in and does the breaststroke, complete with photographers snapping away, and gets on the front page of the paper. That's how Putin plays Obama. And so I think what's going to happen next week, in fact on Tuesday, I think, President Obama goes to Putin's home. He goes to St. Petersburg, and he's then going to be sort of dissed again.
Yeah, and I noticed, having done a lot of these advances overseas, did you ever notice when they're in a joint picture together that President Obama and President Putin are always sitting down because Obama is significantly taller than Putin? And that's another thing, folks. Like behind the scenes, these are all big negotiations all the time. The Russians always win. Like they're never standing up because Putin doesn't want to be embarrassed. And yeah, he's playing us. He's always got the the bare-chested photos and the judo throws going there.
But Dan, here's your point, which I think is a really significant one about Syria. Syria is a proxy fight. Syria is a proxy fight, and I think it's a harbinger of a generation of fighting in the Middle East, where on one side are lining up the radical Sunnis and the other the radical Shiites. So the Shiites are Iran, Hezbollah, Assad. On the other side of the divide are the al-Qaeda terrorists supported by Qatar, by the wealthy Gulf Arab oil states. And they look at Syria as a proxy fight and a fight to the finish, not one that's going to end in a negotiated solution. And for the United States, I'm not sure we really belong in the middle of that fight. To me, I look at the Middle East and say, what are our strategic interests in the Middle East? It's Israel and oil and terrorists. We want to make sure Israel survives. We want to make sure terrorists stay in the Middle East and don't come to our shores, and we want their oil. But as long as we don't need their oil, if we develop American domestic oil and we become energy independent and self-sufficient, then I don't think we need to be in the middle of that civil war that's going to go on throughout the Arab world for the next generation.
Well, KT, I I agree with you 100%. KT McFarland, a Fox News national security analyst. I think with this war fatigue setting in, and I've been asking all of our guests today, and I don't think you can question, it's almost bipartisan on all levels of the political spectrum, from far left liberal to Tea Party conservative. People are really starting to question what you just said. What in the end is the real legitimate meat and potatoes national security interest of the United States? No one's questioning, including you, that this is a humanitarian disaster.
Oh, for sure, and give them all sorts of humanitarian assistance.
Oh, of course, and I don't see any problem with that. We are the most generous, benevolent country on earth. But my question to you here is, we've had some interesting answers on this one. Bill Kristol seems to think that Congress is going to respond after deliberating on it, that they will authorize this action. Major General Scales seem to think no chance. I seem to think there's no chance of that either. They're not in session now. Their constituents are tired of this. How do you think Congress responds?
I think what's happening is that the American military and intelligence communities do not think this is a good idea. That military force in Syria, what are the goals? What is the mission? What are we trying to accomplish by the use of military force? It's been very vague. Are we trying to punish them and deter them? Well, punish them. By the time we get around to it, if we do get around to it, all those weapon systems will have been moved. We'll be bombing empty warehouses. Secondly, if we're going to deter them, what if we're not deterring them? What if Assad says, well, it was a little bit of a punishment, but I can absorb that. I'm just going to go on my merry way. I'm going to use chemical weapons again. Then Obama's in a position like LBJ was during Vietnam. Is he going to escalate? Nobody wants this war. Maybe the only people who think it would be a successful war are the Bush neocons and the Obama interventionists. But the U.S. military, General Dempsey, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, got about as blunt as you can get when he sent a letter to Congress saying there are a lot of problems with arming the rebels. There are a lot of problems with a limited military strike. There are a lot of problems. It would not be a cakewalk for the United States, in effect, to go to war with Syria. So I think that when time goes on, when the ardor of the moment passes, when the headlines pass and the world moves on, by September we're going to be in the middle of anniversary of September 11th coverage. We're not even going to be thinking that much about the tragedies of Syria. So I think at the end of the day, it probably isn't going to happen. If anything happens, Obama will just send a couple of missiles off into the desert.
Well, KT, thank you so much for your time. I can only imagine, again, your cell phone minutes are going to explode today. Thank you so much. By the way, I love the suit on Fox. I watched you on live TV. It was great. We'll talk to you
I'm
soon.
going to come to you all the time for my fashion statements.
It was great. It was great. So I thought I had you on an earlier segment. I ran in and said, how do we have KT? She's on Fox right now. So thank you so much. It was an honor. Great perspective.
Thank you very much.
All right, folks, that was KT McFarland. She'll be on Fox all day as well. We got some great guests coming up for you, folks, so stay tuned, 888-630-9625.
WMAL-FM Woodbridge, Washington. WMAL Washington. WRQX HD2, where Washington comes to talk.
All right, folks, going to be a busy news Saturday. Don't go anywhere. I'm here with you till 7 Dan Bongino. I am at DBongino with a G on Twitter. It's like Bon Jovi with a Gino. So give us a follow. Tweet to at WMAL News. If you have a question, you can tweet to me as well. And you can give us a call. And please do. 888-630-9625. We're talking Syria. Folks, what is our national security interest? If you don't have an end game clearly delineated, an outline and an exit strategy, why are you going to put our people in harm's way? And let's stop using the talking points. Once we get into the region and we start engaging, whether you're lobbing a cruise missile or you're putting a boot on the ground, there is a danger. What's the end game? What's the out plan? What's the exit strategy? How are you going to move the chess pieces? We got Mario Mancuso coming up, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. And then we have my friend Louis Gomert. I can't wait at 5:25. This is going to be terrific. Rep from Texas. I think it's Texas 1. Let's go to Richard in Millersville. Richard, you're on WMAL. What do you got for us?
Where's the imminent threat here? I thought George Bush was that was the standard we had when he was president. It seems like we have a new president and we have a whole different standard.
Isn't that amazing? Right.
Whatever is okay. Whatever's best for us as a plan. And what about the laws of international laws of war? I mean, do we have a right just to muscle in on some small country or just hit them?
Well, Richard, I'm running a little short on time, Richard, but I just wanted to hit your initial point. I think you're right. Like, is the standard by the media, the fourth branch of government, different under a Republican administration than a Democrat administration? And I think The obvious answer here is yes. I mean, if this was a Republican president giving this speech today, the media would have pilloried him. Is there any question about that?
No. And the idea that George Bush would have been in favor of attacking Libya is ludicrous. That woman that you had on previously, McDonald or whatever her name was. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, I don't think she said that.
Why would he on earth want to put in the Muslim Brotherhood? And by the way, that's the only thing that makes any sense in this whole picture of the Middle East. Everything I've yet to hear one time that Obama took a position against the Muslim Brotherhood.
No, well, thanks for the call, Richard. Appreciate it. We're talking Syria, folks. 888-630-9625. I'm Dan Bongino here with you till 7 p. Let's go to Amy in Virginia. Amy, we got a little bit of time left until the hard break here. What do you have for us?
Hi, thank you very much for taking my call. I just wanted to say that personally, I don't think that we should go in the war with Syria. Civil war is something that's very heartbreaking and very sad, and a lot of good people, innocent people, are going to die. But this is not our war. I was there in Lebanon when America came with its ships, and, I was in a shelter for like 8 days. I suffered, and Syria was sending all these bombs on Lebanon right and left, and now it's Syria's turn to have a civil war.
Wow, so let me get this straight, Amy. You were in Lebanon?
Yes, I lived like about 20 years in Lebanon, and I was there during the war, and when the embassy was, all these people died in the American embassy. My friend went there one day to get a visa, and he never showed up because he died, he and his mother.
Oh, gosh.
So, civil war is something very, very, very bad, but it is not our war. We are so far away from Syria.
Right. Amy, listen, I tend to agree with a lot of what you're saying. The world, unfortunately, has very evil people in it that do very evil things. And the question we have to analyze here is, not what's the best decision. Again, what's the least worst decision? And I think right now the least worst decision is to stand fast. Amy, thanks for the call. I do appreciate it. That was a fascinating call. I didn't expect that. Folks, we got to go to break here, 888-630-9625. I'm Dan Bongino. We are talking Syria. Tom, Shirley, stay on the line. We got a great guest coming up as well.
Where Washington comes to talk. At AM 630.
All right, welcome back, folks. I'm Dan Bongino here with you till 7 p. We are talking Syria. Busy news day for a Saturday. Such a nice day, too. Does the president constantly have to do this, playing politics, the Friday document dumps, and then the Saturday press conference? Folks, if you don't think that was calculated, I have a bridge over the bay I will sell you really cheap right now. We've had a great lineup of guests. We have Louis Gohmert, rep from Texas, coming on at 5:25. We had Major General Bob Scales, KT McFarland, Chris Plant, Bill Kristol, and we have been taking all sides of this issue. Folks, I tend to run from the libertarian streak of the party. I think we have to be very cautious right now and take a very deep breath. But I'd love to get the perspective of our next guest, Mario Mancuso. Thank you, sir, for coming on. I deeply appreciate it.
It's my pleasure, Dan.
Mario Mancuso is a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense under Bush 43. Special Ops and combating counterterrorism is your area of expertise, and thank you for your service as well, sir.
No thanks required. Thank you. It's my privilege.
Well, I used to say that when I was in the Secret Service. I'd say, well, thanks for your service. I said, well, listen, you paid for it, and, I was proud to do it. So I'm familiar with that answer as well. But the first question I have for you here, we've been getting all kinds of different perspectives. Bill Kristol tended to align more with the, a larger commitment here. KT McFarland, I think, aligned a little bit more with me along the, hey, let's stand fast here and think about what we're going to get into. But with a war-weary public, war fatigue setting in, Congress out of session, hearing it from all their folks, what do you see as the next step forward now that I think the president, frankly, has punted to Congress and said, I decided, but now you guys decide?
I think that this is an important part of the world for the United States. Not as important as Asia Pacific, but frankly much more urgent. I think for a variety of reasons, largely because of certain policy missteps that we've made in the past 2 years, that we're in the situation we are in now. We have fewer choices, and if we make bad ones, they turn into crises. The real issue, in my view, is not merely the chemical weapons ban. As important as that is, it's really Iran. U.S. credibility is on the line, and this is not just an academic point. Iran is taking our measure. If we can't enforce a red line with the use of chemical weapons against civilians, what do you think they'll do when we say there's a red line with respect to their development of nuclear weapons? that, I think, the inability to enforce that red line can lead to a situation where Iran miscalculates, and then we're in real trouble.
Well, I agree. We're talking to Mario Mancuso, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. I think you bring up some good points, especially taking it from a historical perspective, which we haven't had with the prior guests, talking about some prior missteps that have led us to this point. You know, we failed to get involved in the Iranian Revolution when we had a golden opportunity. And again, I'm just being honest. I tend to come from the libertarian wing of the party, not to entangle us in a lot of foreign messes where we don't understand the outcome, but that's not where we are now. So we didn't get involved there. And then the president, I thought, made a rather amateur hour mistake in declaring a public policy of a red line that he wasn't intent on sticking to. And that's what led us to this point now. I mean, doesn't that, in a way, and I think you alluded to it before, degrade our international reputation and just encourage international actors like Putin and the Iranians to just defy us openly, knowing there's no consequences?
Absolutely. And let me tell you, I'm not one, I don't propose that we should go on military adventures willy-nilly. We should think of American interests first. We should not be blind to the oppression of other people, but we should think of American interests first. At the same time, we have a very different security profile than any other country in the world. We have different interests. And therefore, you know, we are at where we're at. And I believe that it's really dangerous for the United States when a U.S. president speaks and the rest of the world, frankly, disparages it and discounts it. I worry not just with respect to Assad and not just with respect to Iran, but what about China? What about North Korea?
Right.
What about all the other threats we face? You know, earlier this week I was walking my girls to the bus stop, and frankly, the irony could not escape me. Here they are, 7 and 5. I'm taking them to the bus stop. They're heading to school, first day of school, and we're actually debating what to do with respect to a two-bit tyrant in the Middle East that just had recently deployed chemical weapons against his people. And that's where I come at this from.
Yeah. Well, we're talking to Mario Mancuso, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Spec Ops and combating terrorism under the Bush 43 administration. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Want to make sure we have all of our facts straight here. Your bio is very impressive as well. So again, thank you for your service there. Now, my question here. What if Assad survives? We're talking about externalities, policy externalities generated from poor decision-making historically. But let's say he takes the approach, the Clinton approach, of lobbing some cruise missiles in there. Assad survives. Does Assad not come out of this stronger? And is he not as incentivized with the backing of his Russian proxies at this point to now just stick it out and use chemical weapons again if there's no real consequence?
You know, the answer is, I think the short answer is yes. I think if he survives, just like every other time we've launched cruise missiles against in similar situations, I'm thinking Gaddafi, not in 2011, but many years ago, he'll be able to claim to the vaunted Arab street that he survived. But we should not base our decision-making on what we think the political resonance of what an Arab leader might say the day after we attack. We should make it on the basis of what we think makes sense for the United States. And here the situation is so bad that, frankly, that the risks of action, and the risks of action are real, are not necessarily greater than the risks of inaction. The risks of action are, obviously, if we don't do enough, we actually haven't vindicated the principle that you can't use chemical weapons, and we haven't resurrected U.S. credibility. The risks of overreaction will be to incite the Iranians and their proxy Hezbollah to get involved in a fight, which would be messy.
Oh,
but if we don't do, if we don't do anything, U.S. credibility, I said this on the show a few days ago, is in the gutter, and I don't say that lightly. And that's what I care about. I care about how does the U.S. address the short-term problem, but also reposition itself so that it can defend its interests on a going-forward basis with respect to other threats. That's important.
We're talking to Mario Mancuso, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense under the Bush 43 administration. Sir, how do you see the Israelis responding here? I'm just, and I'm reading live on my Twitter feed, as you are, I'm sure. It seems to be that they're bolstering up the blue line now with the Iron Dome, and it looks like the IAF is getting active in Lebanon. But how do you see a timeline here with the Israelis? I think they have to be calculating a very serious response to this as well, assuming that this could spill over their borders any minute. I mean, we already, and their border with the Sinai, they're already in trouble over there. The Sinai seems to be venturing into lawlessness.
Yeah. Obviously, listen, the Israelis have lived in a tough neighborhood for a long time. I think there's a relatively low probability that the Israelis are attacked. However, you never know. Assad Assad can do something, frankly, irrational. And if that happens, then all bets are off. So if Hezbollah attacks Israel, obviously, if Assad attacks Israel, that's just a different story altogether. But a moment ago, I mentioned that the Iranians are taking our measure. Well, our friends, the Israelis, are also taking our measure. Remember that the backstory to this is Iran's drive for regional hegemony and obviously their quest for nuclear weapons. If, in fact, the Israelis don't believe that President Obama and the United States administration can enforce a very clear red line, then I believe their trigger for action in another context, i.e. with respect to the nuclear weapons program that Iran's pursuing, will be very different. So that's the other dimension to this, is that I don't think we should see this problem as only Bashar al-Assad and Syria and chemical weapons, as important as that is, but it's really the other side of Iran's drive for regional hegemony. In fact, many Iranian leaders refer to Syria as the 35th district of Iran. And just for historic reasons, there are only 34 districts within the geography of Iran, to give you a sense of just how important they see this country to their own strategic interests.
Right, and this Sunni-Shia battle has been going on for time immemorial, it seems. And KT McFarland, our last guest, had brought up that, is this a battle we should insert ourselves in between at this point? You have, Saudi proxies on the Sunni side. You have Al-Qaeda operatives. My fear here, and we're talking to Mario Mancuso, is we get involved here and we wind up having an Egypt situation where it's not an enemy of my enemy is my friend. It's my enemy of my enemy is my enemy who's now in charge. Yeah. I mean, al-Nusra, the Al-Qaeda connections, in a power vacuum in a country like Syria, which I think you'll agree does not have the military structure Egypt did. I mean, there's some very dangerous possibilities there, are there not, for a hierarchy taking over?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think it's important probably for another day to talk about policy missteps. Right now we're in a situation we have to sort of address it. But if this were a different, say this, all of these parties were fighting themselves in a different part of the world at a different time, and Iran wasn't next to it, in many respects this would be a dream, right? Mm-hmm. Radical Shiites fighting radical Sunnis, we would just say, why get involved? But the reality is that this fight between radical Shiites and radical Sunnis is taking place within a very important part of the world for the United States, and right adjacent to three historic American allies, Israel, Turkey, and Jordan, and adjacent to, at least via Iraq, Iran, a grave challenge to the United States. And that's why it's so complicated.
Yeah, I glossed over the question before, and I shouldn't have. I was actually, there was so much good information you were putting out there. I was taking down notes for questions. But you were talking to Mario Mancuso, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense under Bush 43. You had mentioned that you feel that the likelihood of an a Syrian attack spilling over into Israel was low. And what makes you think that?
Well, I think it obviously all depends upon what the nature of the U.S. attack is.
Right.
But if we take the president's words that this will be a narrow attack, which, by the way, I personally don't necessarily support, then I think there's enough. I think the Syrians would reason they can weather the attack. They can get all the benefits of standing up and say that they survived the attack without having to add the complicating element of the Israelis getting into the mix. Because as much as they like rhetorically beating up the Israelis is the best military in that region, by far.
Yeah, I think, although it was decades ago, the Six-Day War kind of proved that the IAF is a significant tactical advantage. So, sir, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Again, I know you're busy, so keep the coffee going and keep that cell phone ready. I'm sure you're going to be in high demand as well. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Dan. Thanks. Have a good weekend.
You
Bye-bye.
too. All right, folks, that was Mario Mancuso, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Bush 43 administration, with some more tremendous insight. We've had some top-notch guests, folks. KT McFarland, Bill Crystal, Chris Plant was on before, and Mario Mancuso just now. And coming up, we have another terrific guest. Kudos to Heather. Terrific job booking guests today. I'm giving her a round of applause. Can you hear that? She was unbelievable. Rep. Louis Gohmert from Texas. Good man. I think it's Texas 1, I'm pretty sure. So 525. You're not going to want to miss this, folks. Stay tuned and give us a call. Stay on the line. Gary in Virginia, Wayne in Stafford. 630-9625. I'm Dan Bongino, filling in till 7 p. Don't go anywhere.
Mark Levin, weekdays 6 till 9 p.m. on Washington's Mall, WMAL, where Washington comes to talk.
So just as I will take this case to Congress, I will also deliver this message to the world. While the UN investigation has some time to report on its findings, we will insist that an atrocity committed with chemical weapons is not simply investigated, it must be confronted.
It must be confronted. Well, you hadn't confronted it before, Mr. President. I don't understand. There have been thousands of deaths. Now it must be confronted? I'm Dan Bongino. You're listening to WMAL. I'm here with you till 7 p. 888-630-9625. We've been talking Syria, and it has been an unbelievable show because we've had guests all across the spectrum. I think my views are pretty clear. If you've been listening, I tend to align with the libertarian wing of the party that, you know, listen, folks, it's a humanitarian tragedy. Absolutely no doubt about that, okay? No doubt. Point taken. Accepted. The question is are we creating another humanitarian tragedy by engaging in a conflict where there's no clear endgame? Folks, these are our kids. You can't just say as the President of the United States that, well, you know, we're going to bring an aircraft carrier over into the region and we may potentially lob a few missiles, but don't worry, nobody's going to be in danger because there's no boots on the ground. No, that's not the case. You don't get to do that. They're not your kids. They're ours. Yours aren't old enough yet. I'm sorry, but after years and years of seemingly endless military action overseas and outcomes that have not been desirable, don't you owe us a little bit more than this? It must be confronted. I mean, what is the specific United States security interest in this? What is it? I mean, the real meat and potatoes. I'm not saying humanitarian aid is not an option. That's not what I'm saying. But, folks, do you have an end game? Are you just playing chess? Are you just guessing, Mr. President? I mean, I brought this up with KT McFarland and Mario Mancuso we just had on. What's the potential here for a larger proxy war if we get involved? What if the attack doesn't go as planned? Have we thought this through, or is this just all politics? I mean, is a focus group dictating our international foreign policy? Here's an even better question. Do we even have a foreign policy right now? What is it? We didn't get involved in the Iranian Revolution, but now we're going to get involved in the Syrian war, where there's no architecture at all for a democratic government to take hold. Unlike in Egypt, where we got involved, and ironically, even with a relatively robust military, it still collapsed and didn't end up as we intended. All right, we got a great guest with us here. I'm really looking forward to this. We have my friend and a fantastic congressman from Texas, Representative Louis Gohmert, who, by the way, did an incredible job filling in for Sean Hannity last week. I listened to the whole show. Well done, sir.
Wow, thank you. You really put your credibility on the line by saying that was a fantastic congressman. So thank you for taking that kind of risk.
You got the gift. You got the gift. You were funny. You broke it up with some good personal stories from your time as a judge. I thought it was really a terrific job and very well done. And I really appreciate you coming on today. Again, I got to imagine.
And I appreciate the job you're doing because you know, the scenario questions you just ask are critical questions that we need to be asking. I mean, since the President and Congress all take an oath that is responsible for the United States, not Syria. And I keep, you know, I was in the Army, as you know, back in 78 to 82, and 70, you know, when and you mentioned we didn't get involved in the revolution in Iran. That's the attempted revolution where the people were really trying to oust the radical Islamists in charge and Khomeini and Ahmadinejad. But you know, when Carter was president, he took an active role in pushing for the removal of the Shah. He didn't like the Shah, thought the Shah was a bad man. Well, we feel the same thing about Assad. He's apparently not a good man. He's backed by Iran. He's backed by Hezbollah. But he is fighting against the very people that this administration said they were at war with. they're backed by Al Qaeda. You know, maybe originally it was more peace-loving people, but we didn't help then, and so the Al Qaeda-backed rebels are really who's in charge. With due deference to the senator from Arizona saying to the contrary. Of course, he was wrong about us going into Libya too. We shouldn't have done that. So anyway, I the president's saying we need to attack, and we have high confidence. Those two words, high confidence, that it's the right thing to do. Are you kidding me? You know, because we know people are going to get killed when we start launching missiles. And you have to consider, well, should I get congressional support? Well, how would we look at it if some other country brought ships off our shore and started lobbing missiles into the United States? We take that as an act of war. Right. Well, if you are going to take action that we would consider an act of war if done on us, with deference to what Jesus said, do unto others, well, he really should get congressional approval, number one, so I'm glad he's stopping to do that. And number two, what is the end game? And this is what you keep getting at. Are we going to get Israelis killed? Apparently, they say they're going to attack Israel. Apparently, they were ready to do it. So what is the good of killing people? We don't know who's killed. We said the UN was... their findings supported ours. When we heard from the UN spokesman today, they're still investigating. Now they've gotten back and they're reviewing materials. They're doing analysis. Really? You're ready to kill people and get our allies killed based on high confidence? That's good enough for you? It sure wasn't good enough for you to go after Osama bin Laden. He had to be 100% sure before he'd go after Osama. Right. I don't know. I'm glad he's backed off. I think that was a smart thing to do. I just can't figure out our national interest, our national security interest, in attacking either side in basically a boiled-down Sunni versus Shia, Al Qaeda versus Hezbollah type fight. I don't see it.
We're talking to Representative Louis Gohmert, who represents the 1st District of Texas. And by the way, I'm looking at your Twitter feed, and I want to applaud you for joining us in the Remember the Benghazi 4 twibbon on there. So, folks, give you that a look absolutely. As well. I know you've been an advocate for this issue, sir, so thank you for your voice on that. I deeply appreciate it personally.
No, I appreciate y'all pushing and taking such a strong lead. Yeah. But I don't know. You've asked some great questions, and I don't see that we have the answers yet. Yeah. And we got to remember, too, that when this administration says, our intelligence findings support our position, these are the same folks that said that about 9/11 2012 attack and killing our ambassador and 3 others. That was all based on a video, based on our intelligence analysis. Right. And then we found out, actually, that wasn't true. And you may have talked about the fact that there were reported intelligence agents leaking this week. Hey, they're saying this is from intelligence. This isn't from us. This isn't what we think. I think that's got to be looked into as well. Is this really what our intelligence community thinks, or is this another... all based on the video type representation?
We're talking to Representative Louis Gohmert, representing the citizens of Texas 1. You can follow him on Twitter at Rep. Louis Gohmert with an H, Gohmert. Sir, I had a question for you. We opened up with a soundbite here where the president says, so I will take this case to Congress, and basically says that it must be confronted, talking about the Syrian threat. Now, my question to you is, this is not a new problem, the Syrian problem. I think we can all agree on that. You being a member of Congress, I'd like your perspective inside the corroded D.C. bubble there. Has he ever taken this problem to you before, or is this just a political calculation on his part to punt the football?
I think this, and I think you nailed it with the second. This is kind of a punt the football situation because he's heard from enough Democrats and enough Republicans both saying, this isn't a good idea. This really isn't a good idea. How does this help our national interest? Because we all, our oath is supposed to, defend the same thing. So, I think this is punting, and of course it will end up being a distraction away from the overall effort in September to defund Obamacare.
Right. Well, as we know, nothing this administration does, sir, is political. I say that with a wink and a nod and with the thickest sarcasm known to man. I've got just a minute left with you. We're talking to Representative Louis Gohmert, representing the citizens of Texas 1. My final question, you're out of session right now, correct? You're out there gripping and grinning and talking to your constituents.
This is a time I love because people that have not been listening to their constituents end up listening to constituents, and it seems to make September a better month. So, yeah.
Well, that was my question. Now with the Obamacare debate, not to get off the Syria topic, but with Syria as well, do you find that when you come back, all of a sudden they've kind of seen the light, some of these representatives, when they've had the fingers plunged in their faces and said, you're not listening to us? You see a whole different mentality from your fellow co-workers in the House of Representatives?
Yeah, I think it's extremely helpful. And I'm looking forward to September when we're all back and doing that. And let me tell you, I really appreciate. I heard you substituting for Sean, and you're fantastic, and I really appreciate your perspective. I wish I were serving with you.
Oh, well, thank you. I'll tell you, Connie from your office is terrific. She's one of my favorites. You really picked a gem there. I'll tell you, you want an honest perspective with the edge on it, you go to Connie Hare. She'll tell it like it is. So, sir, listen, it's an honor. Thank you so much for taking the time.
It's my honor. Thank you so much, Dan. Appreciate it.
Okay, that was Representative Louis Gohmert representing Texas 1 and doing a fine job, I might add. Fan of his work. You want to hear the truth? He'll tell you the truth. He did a great job subbing for Sean Hannity last week. Folks, we're talking Syria. We have gotten every perspective, libertarian, conservative, liberal, moderate, Democrat, Republican, but I still want to hear from you. 888-630-9625. What do you think? Do we go in? Do we not go in? What is our national security interest? But I want to know the meat and potatoes. What's our real national security interest? No talking points here, folks. 888-630-9625. I'm Dan Bongino. Give me a call.
Can the U.S. handle the Syrian crisis all by itself? The countdown now begins to Week 1 and RG3's debut, and always breaking news as it happens. Photos, video, and more right now at WMAL.com.
All right, welcome back, folks. Dan Bongino at DBongino on Twitter. If you want to ask me a question, you can follow MAL at WMAL News, and you can tweet us a question. I will look at it. I read my own Twitter feed. I do my own stunts on Twitter, as Jackie Chan would say. I don't think he said that about Twitter, but you get my point. So we've been talking Syria since 3 o'clock. I'll be here till 7, and we have been hitting it from every angle. We've had great guests, Bill Kristol, KT McFarland, Mario Mancuso. We have Jim Carafano coming up. We just had Representative Louis Gohmert from Texas, and we've been hearing it all. But before we have James Carafano on, he has a piece at foxnews.com. 5 leadership lessons on Syria and military power for Commander-in-Chief Obama. Tremendous piece, and folks, I strongly encourage you to take a look at it on foxnews.com. It's really a great piece. So I think we have Mr. Carafano on the line now. Thank you for joining us, sir. Appreciate it.
Hey, it's amazing what you can do on an iPhone.
It's incredible. I mean, again, your phone is probably ringing off the hook. I know with the Secret Service stories, remember they broke, like the White House tours. We went through 3 or 4 phones, so I can imagine any national security incident that your phone probably trains down pretty quickly.
And it's amazing because not only the president's thing, but, they just announced there was an aborted terrorist attack on a container ship in Egypt, and that's huge. I mean, to start seeing terrorist attacks in Egypt, which we were all afraid that, Al-Qaeda was coming, that's maybe even bigger news than our wacky president.
Yeah, and you can follow James Carafano on Twitter at JJCarafano with a C. And by the way, you do have a great line on your Twitter account, trying to prevent World War III 1 tweet at a time. That's very telling. So
it's hard work.
It is. You ain't kidding that, but you're doing a good job. So I'm reading your piece here in the break, 5 leadership lessons on Syria. On FoxNews.com. And the first one, I'd just like to dig into this a bit. Surprise is still a principle of war. Explain for us, our listeners. They think they'd love to hear it is.
So when we were cadet at West Point, the first thing is they do, and they sit you down and they explain to you kind of War 101, which is these kind of mundane principles of war. One of them, Sun Tzu, wrote about thousands of years ago. It's like, dude, don't tell your enemy what you're doing. It's like a fighter who'd be in a ring and saying, okay, next thing, a left hook's coming at you. So the president has basically given Assad so much time now to really prep for this attack that it really, in a sense, undermines the value of it being a real punitive strike. Because in a sense, they know what their kind of targets they're going to be looking at. They can disperse them. They can have human shields. They're lining up their support. They're hiding evidence. They're doing everything. And then they're basically, when it's all said and done, it's likely they'll have weeks to do for this. So in a sense, to really kind of punish the regime, to make it really feel the pain, these attacks don't do that. So they really do become simply symbolic attacks to just make President Obama feel good.
We're talking to Jim Carafano from Heritage, who has a great piece on FoxNews.com. 5 leadership lessons on Syria and military power for Commander-in-Chief Obama. So lesson 1 was surprise is still a principle of war, and I think you eloquently laid that out. Lesson 2, red lines only work when they are red. I should say when they are actually red. I'm adding actually in there. Yeah.
Right.
It seems obvious, right?
So, yeah, I mean, here's the deal. If you're going to threaten somebody that you're going to punish them if they do something, if you just like raising a child, if you don't immediately turn around and punish them, it doesn't have any value. So, the president's stated for 5 years in his presidency now, having Iran get a nuclear weapon is intolerable. So what happens when Iran gets a nuclear weapon? Is the president going to go to Congress and say, okay, now would you authorize this? Look, the president should go to Congress. I don't want to belittle that. It's absolutely, when there's time, the president should consult the body that represents the American people about how he plans on using their military. But having said that, if the president really cared about being president, he would have been running around for weeks and months, lining up support for his Syria policy, building a coalition, building ally, briefing members. And instead what he's done is put out a stupid red line, which was all stupid when we said it. Now his credibility's on the line, so it's basically, well, if you don't vote for this, you're undermining my credibility. Well, what does that tell the president? So the next time he wants to do something really stupid, he should say it first, and then Congress basically has to, authorize it. I mean, didn't we learn any kind of lesson from Obamacare?
Right. We're talking to Jim Carafano from Heritage. You can follow him on Twitter at JJ Carafano. Interesting that this isn't a new problem in Syria either. And we just had Representative Louis Gohmert on the line. Where was he? Does he have some kind of allergy to the Capitol building? I mean, he never goes over there to sell anything. He ran roughshod over everyone with Obamacare. All of his foreign policy decisions seem to happen in a vacuum. And now all of a sudden he's the great decider, but he doesn't decide. He punts the football to Congress while they're not in session and won't be back till September 9th. So I don't know. I don't get it. Like, I'm lost. Do we even have a coherent foreign policy anymore?
Well, that's easy. No. Look, the whole moral outrage thing, I mean, that just is a head scratcher. So 100,000 people die in this war, and there's no sense of moral outrage. But a couple hundred people get gassed. And don't get me wrong. I mean, sarin gas is a horrible way to die.
Course, right.
And anybody that did that, I mean, they're one step to the right of Adolf Hitler, and they ought to be, strung up somewhere. But it just, the whole thing just so smacks of, I don't want to say amateur hour because that makes amateurs look bad.
Right. We're talking to Jim Carafano. We're talking about his piece in FoxNews.com, 5 leadership lessons on Syria. So we got through 1 and 2. Lesson 3, a shot across the bow only works if the enemy thinks you're serious about actually sinking their ship. Explain, please.
So the Coast Guard does this all the time. They're chasing somebody, and what they do is they literally put a shot across the bow. Usually it's not a cannon, it's a machine gun. It's like, dude, if you don't stop, the next shot's going into the ship, and the ship stops. So the president's already come out and said, look, this isn't about changing the balance of power in the civil war, regime changes, or anything else. So basically, he's telling everybody it's just a meaningless symbolic act.
Right, he's already limited he said it's going to be a limited strike. It just seems to me that, let's see, how did the focus group respond to this? They like the word limited. Okay, let's stick limited in there. Sir, there may be consequences to you saying that publicly. I disregard it, polls well. I mean, it really, to me, is disturbing. But let's get to lesson 4 here. We're talking to Jim Carafano about his article on FoxNews.com today. Check it out. It's terrific. Jim Carafano from Heritage. Lesson 4. Victory has 1,000 fathers, defeats an orphan. You're absolutely right. Explain, please.
So so the president's like, well, this is looking really bad, so I need better poll numbers and everything else. Well, that's not a substitute for actually having a real strategy. People forget George Bush had a UN resolution, had an authorization of force from Congress, the wide public support, and a massive coalition. But when the wars got ugly, people just ran away right and left and blamed him. So if somehow Obama thinks if Congress does greenlight his strategy, and here's a problem, he doesn't have a strategy. We're not going to get a good practical outcome here. When things go horribly wrong, it's going to say, well, it's not my fault because Congress voted for this. That ain't going to work.
We're talking to Jim Carafano. You can follow him on Twitter at JJ Carafano, Carafano. Lesson 5, I think, in your article on FoxNews.com, it segues nicely. Mr. President, think before you act. He doesn't seem to do that. He seems to say, talk, and then do, and then after the fact, they have to retroactively go and say, well, we didn't exactly say that. I mean, really, explain, please, Lesson 5, think before you act.
So I'm sure the president thinks that this is brilliant domestic politics. So here's the history of this. He puts out a red line that he put out because he really believed he'd never have to enforce it. Right. And nobody would give him a hard time over doing this. Then all of a sudden, the thing becomes just a disaster. The Allies jump right and left. The UN won't even confirm it that the Assad regime is responsible. That it doesn't poll well. I mean, everything's going against him. So what does the president do? He comes up with this brilliant idea. He says, "I'll just dump this awful mess on the Congress. And how can I lose? If they say no, I can appear the moral leader who earned his Nobel Peace Prize because I had empathy with the international community and by God I wanted to do it. If they say yes to his ridiculously stupid plan and things go horribly wrong, he could say, oh, but we're all in this together. Right. So domestically it sounds wonderful, but from an international perspective, from the perspective of being a world leader, this just looks ridiculous.
Yeah, and he will. He has a PhD in passing the buck. He's absolutely amazing at it. If there's one skill he has, passing the buck, he is absolutely spectacular. Before I let you go here, and thank you for taking the time, one final question I was asking Rep. Gomert and KT McFarland. With Congress not in session and war fatigue setting in all over the country amongst Republicans, Democrats, Libertarians, Occupy Wall Street people, how do you think this plays out in Congress? I gotta imagine right now Speaker Boehner's not too happy about this football being put in his lap.
I think that's a really interesting question. And look, I work at a nonpartisan foundation. I'm not even a Republican. I'm an independent voter. And the West Wing, it doesn't matter if it's run by the left wing or the right wing. They should be doing the right thing. Right. So this is just kind of a cold, detached assessment. My guess is it'll get by in the Senate. That Reid will line up most of the Democrats, and there'll be some Republicans that have been pushing for this. So look at the Senate. The House, I think that's a toss-up because it only gets by in the House if the leadership of the House really puts the screws to people who have had some real issues with this administration. I'm not sure it happens, but here's the deal. And we just put a post on on the Foundry, on our blog by our analyst Jim Phillips, who's tremendously excellent. And we said, look, here's kind of the 10, a whole bunch of things that the president's going to have to do to make the case that this really makes sense. And it's a hard to-do list for these guys. So I don't know if it gets through the House.
An interesting perspective. I would actually be surprised if it gets through the Senate as well. But listen, you've dug into this policy pretty deep. I really value your perspective. Thank you so much for coming on. We're talking to Jim Carafano. Thank you, sir. Really do appreciate the time. All right, folks, that was Jim Carafano. Listen, I don't know. I'm just not sure it's going to get through the Senate either. But the House is always a bit more responsive. 2-year election cycles, gerrymandering, having to pander to a base. So again, thanks to Jim Carafano for coming on, and give him a follow on Twitter at JJ Carafano. All right, folks, we got more coming up. Let's see, we got tons of guests. Let me look at my handy dandy phone here. Captain Chuck Nash. All right, at 6:05. That should be a great interview. And stay on the line. 888-630-9625. Nate, Chris, Gary, Kelly, phone lines are stacked up. We will get to you right after the break. I'm Dan Bongino. Stay tuned.
WMAL FM Woodbridge, Washington. WMAL Washington. WRQX HD2, where Washington comes to talk.
All right, welcome back. Dan Bongino here with you till 7 p. 888-630-9625. We were talking Syria. I'm checking out the TV in here, and there's it has to be a tape show. There's a 24-hour news network talking about Miley Cyrus. Really? Now? Can we dump the Miley Cyrus story? That was a weird performance, though, folks. I have to tell you. Haven't watched MTV in a while. That one was slightly troubling. Felt like I had to take a bleach bath after that one. All right, let's get to the phones. Let's go to Nate in Maryland. Nate, you're on with Dan Bongino. Thanks for calling.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks for taking my call, and I hope you're on again.
Oh,
we
thanks.
need a few good men like you.
No, thanks. I'm always in the process somewhere. I'd like to fight the good fight, so I appreciate that. So it says on your thing that you don't feel that there's a clear mission here either. Is that correct?
Absolutely. There's no clear mission. We managed to somehow insert ourselves in this quagmire, a broad side. There's no strategy whatsoever. It looks like we're just managing our foreign policy with speeches and maybe emails. I don't know what.
And focus groups and political focus groups. I'm telling you, I've been inside this bubble, Nate. I'm telling you right now that some focus groups said, okay, what are the words here? Like here's some lines from the president's speech. Global community. Okay, that polls well. Check. Limited strike. I must confront them. Check. I mean, why would you give a speech on a Saturday otherwise if there wasn't some political motivation to this, right?
Exactly, and this is the specialty lately of the administration and Democrats. They keep playing those traps, and the Republicans manage to fall in for some reason. And we're going to do something on our side as well. But I want to take this to a different route here.
We're up against a hard break, Nate, so you got to make it quick. I'm sorry. What do you got for us?
Absolutely. So the beneficial out of this whole thing, obviously, we have a stake at this. We want to cut a couple of tentacles of Iran into that whole area over there, and by doing that, we can just almost debilitate the entire octopus by doing that, just going through and getting them out of Syria and as well as Lebanon, Iran, Hezbollah, and that type of thing. But the issue is, if we want to go and do something, why can't the Saudi Arabians, the Qatar and those areas over there develop and put together the boots on the ground, and we can assist from the air or otherwise?
Well, Well, personally, I don't think. Thanks for the call, Nate. I don't think we should be getting involved with our military apparatus at all, but it's a valid question. But they are already involved in this proxy war. There's no question about it, through a variety of means, weapons supplies, money. So it's not that they're out of this altogether. Their hands certainly aren't clean. All right, let's go to Chris in Maryland. Chris, thanks for calling.
Thank you. I enjoy your show. Thank you for your service. I agree with KT McFarland. She's dead on. This is a trap, and we would be foolish to fall into it. And if we go deeper in the debt, we're just enabling them more.
Yeah, and Chris, would you agree with that? My perspective, I think, aligned well with KT's. What's the end game? I mean, did you notice in the speech today there was no talk of a hard metric? Like, if we achieve this and we're to take out, Syria has roughly 6 functioning airstrips where their military could be decimated. We're going to take out these 6 airstrips, and then we're going to, pull out and we're going to let the rebel force take over. There was none of that. It was just a bunch of flowery talk again, where it must be confronted. The threat. Well, what does that mean, Mr. President? Right? Don't they have a responsibility to give us what the hard out is?
I agree, and I think people are beginning to read between the lines. They're beginning to figure out that we've got the enemy in our camp, and they're trying to find a way to keep him, how would we say, neutral, try and neutralize him for the next 2 or 3 years. KT is dead on, and she's the only one that's really stuck her neck out and said, look, what is our interest over there? Let's stop fighting all these little civil wars. We have no business being inside all these civil wars. They've been fighting each other for centuries.
You know what, Chris? I'm glad you said that, because I tend to align with KT on that as well. I think she asked the obvious question. The Sunni-Shia battle is long predates the United States. I mean, what is the outcome? Are we going to solve this battle, or are we just going to sacrifice? And thanks for the call, Chris. Or are we just going to sacrifice, our own American flesh and blood for this? Let's go to Kelly in Frederick. Kelly, you're on the Dan Bongino show till 7 p.m.
Thank you for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
I have a son that's in South Korea right now in the Army. And as far as I think most anyone in the service, if you're going to give them an order, then you need an order with a definite objective, and I think he needs to go. In particular, the guy in Syria.
Assad.
He's the one that needs to go. No one else.
Right, and I think Kelly. By the way, thank you for your having a family member serving. You know, we all sleep peacefully at night when mothers and spouses like yourself, don't. So that's an enormous sacrifice. I think sometimes we forget that when our men and women are serving over in combat, there's a family behind them that sheds a tear at night worrying about what's going to happen tomorrow. So thank you very much.
Exactly.
But I think you bring up a great point. Like, we agree on that. We agree Bashar Assad has to go. Okay, agreed. We agree this is a humanitarian crisis. I think the question is, and the only question, Kelly, right now is, are we the ones to do it? Why and how? Right? I mean, he didn't answer any of those questions, the president, in his speech today.
Exactly. He just is not qualified at all to be our president. He doesn't know what he's doing as far as...
You know what it is, Kelly? He's looking for a YouTube video right now. Thanks for the call, Kelly. Sorry, bad political humor. That's what he's looking for, a YouTube video to blame this on. Sooner or later, there'll be a guy in Florida who put out a YouTube video 5 years ago who'll get arrested for this action in Syria if it doesn't work out. 888-630-9625. 888-630-9625. We have Captain Chuck Nash coming up at 6:05. Folks, stay tuned. You are not going to want to miss this. I'm here with you till 7 p. Dan Bongino, 888-630-9625. Stay tuned.
Where Washington comes to talk. 105.9 FM. And AM 630. WMAL.
All right. Little John Cougar Mellencamp. Or when I was a kid, there was that show on MTV. Remember Beavis and Butthead? They called him John Cougar Mellenball. Well, I was not born in a small town. I was born in New York City. So, folks, I'm Dan Bongino. We've been talking Syria, trying to lighten it up a bit. Tough topic, folks. There's really no... Can't take the edge off this topic. Give us a call, 888-630-9625. We've got callers on the line to hang out. We'll get to you. I promise you, Brent, Gary, Herb, we will get to you. But right now we have another great guest for you. We have Captain Chuck Nash. Captain, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
My pleasure, Dan.
So, first question I have for you. We had Rep. Louis Gomer, KT McFarland, and I've been asking everyone this. Timeline forward, how do you see this? Now, Congress not being in session right now, so they're home, and as you well know, they're hearing it from their constituents right now on everything from Obamacare to tax policy to the lack of economic growth, and now you add another, you add whipped cream onto this pie, and that whipped cream doesn't taste good, this serious situation, right? And all of a sudden, they're getting it from all angles. Now, the president punts, gives it to Congress, says, I've decided, but I haven't decided. I'm going to bring it to Congress. How do you see this proceeding forward?
Well, they're going to obviously want to put this right up front when they get back on the 9th. But if there's any delay at all, Dan, the issue is they get back on the 9th. They're in session 9th through the 12th, out 13 to 16, back in 17 to 20, and back out 21 to 29, meaning they're only in session 9 out of the 30 days in September.
It's a great job, isn't it? Wish I did that job.
If you can get to work.
Yeah, really. Great work if you could get it.
Yeah, now the Senate is in session according to their schedule 16 of the 30 days. But, you count weekends and everything. But the House has a very liberal schedule in August. So they're going to have to get this up front. Now, here's the dilemma that the president has worked himself into. It is actually a double blind. The first blind was he made the decision to go out, set a red line, it's all on me, I'm saying this. Okay. Then everybody gets all excited. Senator McCain and Graham go over to Egypt. While they're in Egypt, Secretary Kerry says, and they're in Egypt to try to talk the Egyptian military into starting a dialogue with the Muslim Brotherhood. While they're there, Secretary of State Kerry says, well, the Egyptian military is just trying to restore democracy, totally undercutting McCain and Graham, who were sent there to try to start this conversation. Now, to Syria, what happens? This time, Senator Kerry winds up or Secretary of State Kerry winds up under the bus because yesterday he was speechifying about how, it's America's got to be known for what we say we do and all of this. And then this afternoon, boom, he shot right out of the saddle, under the bus with everybody else. And now you've got a double-blind situation, meaning if we say we're going to do something that's ill-advised, but we do it, and you measure the reaction that comes from that, i.e. the unintended consequences, you can directly attribute those reactions to our action.
Right. We're
in
talking.
This case, if Congress says no mas, and we're not going to do this, we're not going to give you authority to use force, then President Obama can say, okay, well, therefore I can't do it. Or he could say all he said in the Rose Garden today, which is, I believe, I've determined, I've, and say, I'm going to do it anyway. Well, in that case, if he acts without the consent of Congress, then it's all on him, and we're all going to be reminded of when then Senator Kerry, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, threatened to impeach then President George Bush if he acted in Iraq without congressional authority.
Exactly. We're talking to Captain Chuck Nash about Syria. Their foreign policy reminds me of that movie, The Usual Suspects, where they catch Kevin Pollak and they've got him in the chair and they're interviewing him and they say, we can place you in Queens on the night of the robbery. He says, well, that's great. I live in Queens. Do you have a team of monkeys working on this around the clock, or did you figure this out yourselves? I mean, seriously, that you just laid it out. It was like, now we're going to pick A, now we're going to pick B. A's wrong, but A's not wrong because our personnel are still overseas enforcing A, but not anymore. I mean, we are in utter chaos over there right now, Captain, right?
Well, the movie it reminds me of is Being There, but, when you start to focus down on the unintended consequences, if the unintended consequences of action could be a strike on Israel. It could be terrorist strikes on U.S. interests worldwide, including the United States. There are a lot of different things that could happen.
Well, Captain, can I ask you that? Because we had Jim Carafano from Heritage on right before you, and that was one of the questions we were digging into. What do the Israelis do right now? The IAF, the Blue Line. I mean, there's so much. The Israelis, as Jim Carafano stated, and he was absolutely right, they're in a pretty dangerous neighborhood right now. They're not secured by two oceans like we are. I mean, what's their predicament right now?
And that's the downside of doing nothing, which is you can't immediately measure the response, but there is one. And therefore, what do our allies think? If the Secretary of State from now on says the sky is blue, everybody's going to look up to double check, and they're still not going to believe it.
Right.
So it's not just it's not just our enemies who have been emboldened by this, and they're running off, jumping in the streets and firing weapons in the air. They're all excited because the strikes have been removed as an immediate threat. That's great. Everybody on the bad side of the line is looking at this as another example of the weak horse, the paper tiger. But our friends, the people on the shiny, bright side of the line, have to be saying, oh, my God, can we ever trust anything they say again?
We're talking to Captain Chuck Nash. Captain, I agree. Our foreign policy bank account, the capital's been diminished. There's almost nothing left anymore. And we were talking to Jim Carafano before. He had a piece in FoxNews.com, and he had a couple lessons here. One of them was interesting. He had lesson 3 regarding Syria. A shot across the bow only works if the enemy thinks you're serious about sinking their ship. Now, my question to you here is, let's say we take option 2. We had laid out 4 options earlier in the show. Option 2 being cruise missiles and no boots on the ground, and it does absolutely nothing, and it doesn't kill Assad and doesn't diminish his forces at all. Doesn't the externality generated from this make Assad even more powerful, having survived it? I mean, how do we win in that scenario?
Where we are right now is we are talking about, not even reacting, but we're talking about possibly reacting in some minor measured way to something Assad has allegedly done. In other words, we are responding to his initiative, correct?
Right. So are you not comfortable with the information?
What will we do after we shoot the cruise missiles? Have we taken the initiative? No. We're now waiting for what's he going to do next. In other words, we're still at the end of the whip.
Right. Are you comfortable, though, with the case Secretary of State Kerry made the other day, that they're conclusively sure at this point that this was Assad who did, in fact, unleash the chemical weapons attack? Because there's been speculation out there, Captain, as you are well aware.
There is a lot of speculation. There are reports in the media of accidental use. There is a report where the intelligence community came out and said, "Wow, we were monitoring all this stuff for 3 days, and now when it happened, we kind of connected the dots." Well, here we are in the United States worried about all this NSA collection stuff and everything, and there they have units talking to each other, and it takes supposedly a poison gas attack to connect the dots. There is a lot of unknown unknowns in this, and as much as they want to say that it is a, quote, slam dunk, unquote,
right.
It's not a slam dunk. There's still a lot to be determined, and even the intelligence community has gone on record as saying that they're learning, they're putting more things together as they go. So with all of this, the American people are war-weary. They're just tired of hearing about wars, spending on wars, and by and large, 99% of the American people aren't really involved in the pain and the anguish of war, which is the 1% who are actually serving. So you've got a discontented populace. You look at the polls, roughly 80% are saying, don't do it.
Right.
Well, when these folks come back from their August break and come back into session, I think they're going to be looking at the polls just like the White House is looking at the polls, and when this comes up to a vote, I would not be at all surprised, given that the president has staked the prestige of the United States on this. I would not be surprised if the Congress says, no, we're not going to give you authority to do this because, A, you don't have a plan other than you want to fire around at the Syrians.
At a moving target, right.
Oh, by the way, you shoot somebody, guess what? They're not going to take kindly to it. What comes next? We don't know. What do you want to do next? We don't know. Not good enough.
Right, people tend to not enjoy that. We're talking to Captain Chuck Nash. I have just a few minutes left with you, but one final question for you. I noticed you alluded to Donald Rumsfeld's unknown unknowns, and I think he was accurate. You have, known knowns, known unknowns. In other words, you know what you don't know. You know there's information out there, you just don't have it. And then you have the famous unknown unknown, to take his terminology, where you don't even know what you don't know. And my question on that front is, we have no idea what is going to happen, second and third order effects with the Russians, the Iranians, with the Saudis, if we are to get involved with any larger effort other than, even if it's just a cruise missile attack, once those bombs start falling and any military actions initiated, I mean, are we correct in to say, you're right, we don't even know the unknown. We have no idea where this is going to go.
No, we really don't. And that's why when the president and the national security team sit down and they start looking and contemplating action, one of the things they have to understand and they have to make a value judgment on is what we are about to do worth those unknown unknowns. Is it really worth it in terms of the national security interest of this country to do it anyway? Because it better be worth something, and it better be worth a lot. Because if it isn't, and you unleash all of those second and third order effects, you're going to be sitting there with more than egg on your face. You're going to be plunging the country into serious, serious jeopardy.
Captain, thank you so much for your time. Again, incredible analysis. Thank you so much for lending us your expertise on this busy Saturday. Captain Chuck Nash, thank you, sir, very much.
My pleasure, Dan.
All right, folks, 888-630-9625. We got 40 more stacked minutes in this show. We got Mike on the line, Gary, Herbert. We'll get to you. Give us a call, 888-630-9625. We're going to be taking a lot of calls in these next few segments, folks. Talking Syria. I'm Dan Bongino.
Chris Plant, weekdays 9 to noon on Washington's Mall, WMAL, where Washington comes to talk.
All right, folks, Dan Bongino with you till 7 p, and we're going to stack this last 35 minutes. We're going to stack it thick and deep. Phone calls, Syria. But before we get to that, so I was just coming out of the bathroom, and I'm looking at my face, and I shaved this morning, and it looks like I shaved with a chainsaw. My God, you're laughing, right? Jeff's like, yeah, you're not kidding. I don't know what I did. I probably used this razor 50 or 60 times because I was a little too lazy to shave with it. But my gosh, and it's not even like a sharp chainsaw. It looks like I shave with. Jeff reminded me of this story. I was with the Secret Service one time and I forgot my razor. I forget where I was. I think South America somewhere. And I called downstairs to the hotel and I said, yeah, I think it was Argentina. I said, you guys have a razor? And, of course, they bring you up one. What they don't tell you is it's like a butter knife razor. And I woke up the next morning. It was horrifying. It looked like I had been like a serial killer had attacked me, folks. Yeah, the trials and tribulations of Dan Bongino and his former life. Kind of funny, right, folks? 888-630-9625. All right, let's go to the phones. We got a lot of calls here. Robert in Germantown. Robert, you're on with Dan Bongino. What do you got for us?
Well, how are you, Dan? I'm glad I got you. I called a couple times earlier about this. I didn't hear the president's speech. How are you today?
I was doing great until all this news broke. We had a couple great topics, but this one has been lighting up the phone line, so we'll have to get to those topics on another show.
Well, I'll try to make this fast. I really think if you weigh all the variables involved with this supposed attack that we're going to do, this shot across the bow and whatnot, right. I think at this point, you don't let a potential adversary or enemy know what you're going to do. These people have moved all their materials and valuable assets out of harm's way. So at this point, for us to make an attack, you don't need to be a rocket scientist or a national security advisor or whatever to think that it would be a complete waste of our tax dollars.
Well, Robert, on your shot across the bow remark, I agree. We had Jim Carafano from Heritage on before, and his Fox News piece, he writes, hey, listen, a shot across the bow only works if the enemy actually thinks you're serious about a further engagement, sinking the ship. To throw a shot across the bow and then say, hey, folks, we're good, thanks. That didn't hit you. We were just trying to scare you. It's kind of a waste of time.
I think what this is really going to cause, with all the other negativity that's going on in the Middle East, is I really think it would be a precursor to a major war. I really do.
Well,
I think that Al-Qaeda is so active over there right now in all the different countries. And obviously the thing that really disturbs me is that obviously this president has shown on several occasions that he really doesn't care too much about Israel's interests.
Well, Robert, thanks for the call. I'm going to try and get to a few more calls here, but before I get to the next one, folks, Robert brought up an interesting point. What are the second and third order effects here? Again, these are our kids, okay? Our boys and girls, our men and women going overseas, who some of them are not coming home. And if you, as the commander-in-chief, cannot lay out a specific case for international action, a specific case that has a specific United States national security interest, if that case isn't clear-cut, why are we doing this again? He certainly didn't make the case today, I think, in this speech with the focus group tested words, the global community, it must be confronted. Well, what does that mean? All right, let's go to Herbert in D.C. Herbert in D.C., you're on WMAL. What do you got for us?
This is Irvin.
Irvin?
Yes, we got a lot of experts on the radio,
Oh, yeah.
And we have a president, and at time of crisis, I thought it was our tradition to fall behind the president and support him. I don't. It's something new about us,
Really? What about when President Bush was in Iraq? And listen, let me be clear on this. I did not agree with that intervention, but Irvin, right? I mean, I think you're rewriting history here. The tradition has been to fall behind the president. Who's done that? President Bush was being literally hung in effigy.
I said it goes across the board.
Okay, so then your point's not valid.
You're assuming that I said every time the president has to make a decision like this, we should get behind him.
Wait, hold on. I want to understand where you are on this. Hold on a second, please. So your point, Irvin, is that when we put troops in harm's way, whether it be cruise missiles, whatever it is, any international military intervention we get involved in, that we should get behind the president, correct?
Yes.
Okay, but that's just not the case. I mean, that doesn't happen just because the president said it was. I mean, Irvin, listen, hold on. Time out. Irvin, I have kids now. My 2 daughters are not old enough to serve yet. My oldest is 9. But why should we automatically have to get behind the president if the majority of the American public thinks it's a poor decision and kids make them home in body bags?
The point is that, first of all, everybody doesn't serve. It's the people who the 1% of people serve in this country. Everybody else skates. So don't give me that.
Go give you what? That people are going to... You just made my point. That 1% of people, whatever the statistic you're quoting, that serve, so you're willing to just shuffle them into an overseas intervention. Wait, hold on. Time out. I let you talk, now I talk. So you're willing to shuffle this 1 out of 100 person over into a potential foreign death zone when you're not necessarily comfortable with what the president said was our logical exit strategy or outcome, and you think I'm wrong by questioning the policy?
Let me give you this. This is the quote that was given by Thomas Jefferson.
All right, I don't like. How long is it? We don't have a lot of time.
Martin Luther King. It's real quick. It's a dangerous world.
Right.
It's not because men do evil. It's because good men do nothing.
All right,
about it.
Listen, that's a great quote. I agree, but you know what? Real kids come home in real body bags. Okay, so I love the quote, but what's the real metric?
In that case, we would not have done anything in World War II.
No, that's still Irvin. You didn't listen, Irvin. Hold on. Time out. The penalty flag is up. Irvin, hold on. I gotta turn you down, Irvin, because you're still talking. Okay, Irvin. Let me explain here. You clearly didn't listen to my opening here at all. When the United States has a clear national security interest, are you going to seriously make the case, Irvin, that World War II was not a clear interest for the United States? Little thing, Pearl Harbor, have you heard of it? All right, Irvin, you still on the line? Now you can respond because you were talking over me. I let you talk. Now go ahead.
I'm saying to you.
Yes?
When evil comes into view, it's incumbent upon the good men to do something about it.
Okay, well
period.
All right, well, what about the Congo? What about Burma? What about that? I mean, that evil doesn't count?
In the Congo, the Belgians did that.
There's Irvin. What? Okay, well, what about one? I could totally you're missing my point. What about Burma? I mean, evil came into sight in Benghazi. Nobody did anything about that. The president blamed it on a YouTube video. Am I wrong?
My point. You're making a very obtuse point.
I think you're doing kind of like the end around here. Like you're going to lose the argument and you want to switch it to a different topic.
Your point.
No, you can't answer my question. What about Benghazi?
Evil triumphs when good men do nothing.
Irvin, great quotes. You're like the quote master. Thank you very much. But unfortunately, good people die when presidents make bad decisions as well. Let's live in reality here for a minute. Okay, let's go to Brent in Silver Spring. Brent, you're on WMAL. What do you got for us?
Taking the call.
You're very welcome.
Thank you for taking the call.
Yeah, you're welcome again. What do you got for us?
It was fun to go after that call.
Yeah, how do you follow that up, Brent, right? You got to bring it right now.
Right now. I think, was the point that he was trying to make was that people should support the president until the action comes and they might not agree with it?
I don't know what point he was trying to make. Listen, he's my president, too. I've never taken any personal shots at the president. But right now, at least as we know, and not talking about any clandestine activities, you're making a good point. There are no troops as we know it, as I know it currently, I would think anyone else at this point who's not behind the scenes, in an actual combat situation in Syria. So is he making the argument that we're not allowed to engage in any healthy policy debate as if the president said it and it all has to be good? The president said that, and let me quote him, it must be confronted. So when our kids have to go over there, I mean, Brent, I think he was making a case that he said it, so everybody just wash your hands of it right there. We're all good. I think that's insane.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Obama, he hasn't made an actual decision yet. He's saying the chemical weapons are bad that were used, and it was probably used by Assad, and that we should take some kind of action. But he hasn't done anything yet. So I think, until Congress gets back together and gives their approval or disapproval, it's hard to say, listening to some callers saying how bad the president is doing at this situation. I mean, what is he doing wrong? It's not his fault that Congress is on a break for the holiday.
Yeah, well, he could call him back, and he chose not to. Brent, thanks for the call. I appreciate it.
One more point.
Wait. All right, we'll take one more. What do you got for us? One more point. We got to break soon.
I also was agreeing with Bush. So I'm not just saying everybody's bad on the right. I think Bush did a great job as president, and so I'm not bashing either side. I'm just saying we should wait and see until we judge him for the actions that he's doing.
All right. Well, thanks for that. You snuck that in. That was pretty good. Brent was good, right, Jeff? He's like, I'm not going to be silenced here. I like that, Brent. Take the bull by the horns. I'm not going to let that sound engineer let me off the... No way. Good job, Brent. All right, listen, we got a lot of callers on the line. Mike, Gary, Chris, Scott, Linda. We'll get to you. 888-630-9625. We got a solid 25 minutes. We're going to stack it pretty deep. I got a bunch of stuff to talk about. What does Congress do? Is this a proxy war? I'm Dan Bongino. You're listening to WMAL. 888-630-9625.
Can the U.S. handle the Syrian crisis all by itself? The countdown now begins to Week 1 and RG3's debut, and always breaking news as it happens. Photos, video, and more right now at WMAL.com.
All right, welcome back. Dan Bongino here till 7P, 888-630-9625. Hey, thanks to Sylvie Rivera. Posted on my Facebook page. Great show on MAL this Saturday afternoon. You bet she missed 45 minutes, but you were in church, so don't worry. We'll give you a pass, Sylvie. Thank you so much. I got a great picture on my Facebook page today. Check this out, Jeff. This is me in the Secret Service Training Center. What do you think? You like that? Yeah, you're training hard. I did a little memory shot, walking down memory lane there. Missed the job, folks. That was a great gig. Secret Service, I loved it. They gave me a shot as a young kid. I was only 24. 24, 50 years ago or so. You were like, you were ready to keel over. Like 36 was probably, now all of a sudden 24, you're still young. All right, folks, we've been talking Syria. I'm Dan Bongino. We've had a great show today. The guest lineup, thanks to our good friend Heather Smith. She got KT McFarland. We had Rep. Louis Gomer, Jim Carafano. We had so many good guests, I can't even remember them all. I'll tell you the truth, it was just a terrific show. So, we're going to keep talking about the Syria situation. We had Irvin on the phone before, and Irvin seemed to believe that because the president says that, and I quote, these are the president's words, not mine, Assad he's talking about here, it must be confronted. Just because he says it doesn't make it true, right? I mean, folks, are we not allowed in a constitutional republic to have a healthy debate on the back and forth of the issues if it's going to involve the very real flesh and blood of our men and women? I think so. Don't call me crazy on this one, folks, but I think we should take a really deep breath on this one first. All right, let's go back to the phones. Again, 888-630-9625. Let's go to Linda in Gaithersburg. Linda, you're against this intervention? Well, so am I. No, you're out? We lost Linda? Call us back, Linda. That looked like a good call. We haven't had someone against the intervention in a couple of minutes here. All right, let's go to Scott in Falls Church. Scott. All right, you're along my line of work here. We're Civil War. We have no business getting involved in. Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
Hi, Dan.
Yes, sir.
Oh, there you go. Happy Labor Day to you.
Yes. Thank you very much. It was until we sped in to get this breaking news on here. We've had an unbelievable show, so it's been a great experience. What do you got for us, Scott?
Hey, well, you basically, for the last 60 years, the Arab world has been looking at us as always meddling in their affairs. Whether it doesn't really matter what it is. Goes back to Iran, and that's one of the biggest problems that they have with us. Right. And this is a civil war that we have no business in.
Right. I mean, Scott, we deposed the Shah. Right? We allowed that to happen, and look what we got. Look what we got stuck with. We got stuck with the Ayatollah.
They still hold it against us, and they will for many more decades. And this thing, how are we going to? Who are we going in there to help? I mean, these bad players on both sides.
Well, Scott, thanks for the call, and I think you just asked the operative question here: who are we going in to help? And the answer is, I don't know. Al-Nusra, the rebels, the Al-Qaeda affiliates on the ground. We're going to create a power vacuum. Who's going to take over, folks? Egypt was bad enough, and at least they had a functioning military at the time. All right, let's go to Henry in Springfield. Henry, you have some problem with the president's domestic policies. Let's hear it.
Well, no, the issue here is that the president now finds himself in a situation that he's going to turn to the Congress.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, because of the zealous nature in which he's pursued his domestic agenda, he has no allies there. So
right. Wait, hold on one sec, Henry. I agree with you on that. I didn't mean to cut you off. I promise I'll give you some time here, but I agree with you 100%. Like, he's talking all of a sudden about, listen, we're looking for congressional allies. I'm going to go to Congress. We're going to seek authorization. One, as if Syria is a new problem, but you just brought it up. Where did he do this on the domestic agenda? He just trampled over Congress on Obamacare, on Dodd-Frank, on the bailout. I mean, almost no Republican votes on any of those. I mean, he had none on Obamacare. Yep. On the stimulus, I think he had one, the rep from Louisiana who's no longer in office. So I agree with you on that front.
So where is his principles on this? And let me just, presuppose the question. If he feels that this is a national principle, that this is something in our dramatic in our national interest, such that we're going to expend, blood and treasure, then okay, are you willing to compromise on the questions of the amount of funding to Obamacare? Are you actually willing to reach across the aisle at this point in time so that you can gain Republican votes on their core domestic issues? You cannot have it both ways. You cannot be the leader of the nation, and jam it down people's throats on some of these things. And so now it really, his chickens are coming home to roost on how he's trampled over the opposition, because now he needs the House to help him out on this vote, and he has no friends there.
Right,
at least
Henry,
amongst the majority.
Sorry, I don't mean to cut you off again, but again, I agree. I mean, yep. Reagan had Tip O'Neill. They may not have agreed on just about any policy initiative, but they learned how to have a beer at night and engage in some spirit of cooperation. Yep. Clinton had Newt Gingrich. Who does this guy have?
Yep. Let me address one thing about what Irvin had to say earlier, because and you brought it up as if, hey, World War II, clearly you have to say that was in the national interest, and that was good versus evil. But please do remember, historically, World War II begins in 1939, and it's not until 1941 that FDR is able to get the Congress to go along with him. We had ships sunk escorting convoys across the Atlantic in 1940, but that wasn't enough to get it tripped. And so, historically, these things take time to build national consensus, and the president is going to have to come to the people and come to the Congress and make a case that's understandable. It can't simply be, hey, I'm the commander-in-chief, I have the forces, I'm going to do with them what I wish.
Right. Henry, you know what? That is a spectacular point about World War II that I think roundly refutes where Irvin was going with that. Well said. So thank you for the call. That was really, talk radio, good calls, like music, right? A good song, you just keep it on. That was a great one. So thank you, Henry. Let's go to Bob Manassas. Bob, you're on with Dan Bongino. What do you got for us?
Thanks for covering this topic. My first problem is Jim Clapper, head of the NSA, lies under oath, then later tries to be cute and says, I told the least untruthful thing. Well, if this is the
Wait, just to be clear, Bob, so the audience understands, Jim Clapper, when he was up on the Hill testifying about the NSA, made those statements, correct?
Correct. What he said in answer to a question which was given to him the day before, so he could have asked to go into executive session. He didn't do it. He was asked, was there any monitoring of American citizens? He flat out said no. He lied under oath. Now, this is like the little boy that cried wolf all the time. When the wolf finally showed up, nobody believed him. I mean, even if these intelligence assessments are correct and they're doubtful, why should we start believing them? Number two, when Obama sees 425 Kurdish people killed near the Turkish border, including 125 kids by this al-Nusra group, the Al-Qaeda affiliate, is he going to start sending cruise missiles over there? No. Why is it that we get in on the side of, and this started back in Serbia, in Kosovo, why do we always get in on the side of these religious wars with the Islamists so that the radicals end up winning? I don't think that's smart for us.
Right, and Bob, what's our record of success in the region? I just don't get it. I mean, Libya, no. Tunisia, even which was at least a mild success story for a little while, doesn't even seem to be doing that terrific right now. I mean, we had Benghazi obviously in Libya, Egypt right now. We have the Sinai, which was relatively peaceful and demilitarized for a while, is now turning into a terrorist hotspot. I mean, what's our record of success? I think you bring up a great point. Nil.
Not good. Yeah, and again, cruise missiles. Once you set them in motion, you can't pull those things back. At least that I know of. What collateral damage will come out with the videos that the Assad people or somebody will use over there against the United States? Then what's Obama going to do?
Right, Bob. I mean, once you launch the mission, right? Thanks for the call, by the way. That was a terrific call. There's no do-overs, folks. It's not like, Wayne's World where they're playing hockey in the street and it's like, okay, do-over. It doesn't work that way. We're talking about expensive, dangerous military equipment that is going to kill people overseas that may generate second and third order effects we are totally, completely unaware of. Again, we had Captain Nash on the phone before talking about the unknown unknowns. To use Donald Rumsfeld's terminology, we don't know what those second and third order effects are. What if they're worse than what we had originally? All right, let's go to Gary in Gainesville. Gary, you're on WMAL. What do you got for us?
How you doing, Dan?
I'm
Thanks for taking my call. Look, there is no end game here, okay? I mean, he's painted himself in a corner. Leave him there. We can't send our boys over there and women over there for this. This is ridiculous. It is. I mean, it's stupid. I mean, we didn't go in with Saddam Hussein when he gassed the Kurds. I mean, that's a fact.
Yeah, well, I brought up before to the other caller.
Consider it.
Gary,
we didn't consider it.
Listen, Syria, as you well know, is not the only country or even region on our planet that's got very serious conflicts of visions, to steal Thomas Sowell's terminology right now. I mean, again, you have Burma, you have regions of Southeast Asia. We have humanitarian crises going on in China, North Korea. I mean, what is the least worst answer right here? Thanks for the call, Gary. Folks, these are not easy questions, and I'm sorry that I can't get on this microphone and give you a black and white answer. I can't, but maybe I'm giving you an answer by not giving you an answer. And maybe the answer is we need to take as a country a very deep breath right now, having looked at this from the historical spectrum of our recent military interventions in the region that have not worked out as we thought they were. How many of our kids are we going to send over to fight in these combat zones where we don't have any expectations of a positive outcome? I don't know. I'm not willing to do that, and I don't think you're willing to do that either. I'm Dan Bongino, filling in. We got about 10 minutes left, folks, so we're going to go to break. But give us a call. We got some time. Take some more calls, 888-630-9625. 888-630-9625. Stay tuned.
WMAL-FM Woodbridge, Washington. WMAL Washington. WRQX HD2, where Washington comes to talk.
All right, folks, welcome back. Wrapping up a solid, and I mean solid, 4 hours. Got the call today. Syria. Got to get on the air. And I'll tell you, we stacked the show thanks to our good friend Heather. And James, by the way, wonderful job as well. Friend James Hewitt. He just gave me a little, good job, too. I'm like, hey, thanks, bud. Appreciate that. All right, we had a stacked show, folks. KT McFarland, Eli Lake, Jim Carafano, Chuck Nash. We had the A-team on today, and you got a lot of interesting perspectives. I think this is one of those issues, Syria, of course, where, strange bedfellows emerge. You have folks like myself who tend to align with the libertarian wing of the Republican Party, who oddly enough feel the same as some who would consider themselves liberals. It really does create strange bedfellows in this situation, especially with a very, very war-weary country. And, folks, if I can just for a minute, if you'll indulge me, make your voice heard. Don't think for a second, because I hear this all the time when I'm bouncing around the state or on Twitter or social media when I interact with folks. Say, well, nobody listens. It doesn't matter. Well, folks, I say this all the time. It does matter. You don't have a choice. This is not a golf game, politics. It is a boxing match, okay? You know, with golf, because people say to me, oh, I'm in Maryland, they complain about the tax situation, or they feel frustrated in whatever state you live in or wherever you're listening. Oh, politicians don't listen, I'm out. You don't get to be out. In golf, right, you're golfing out there, and a storm breaks. You're like, I'm done. The golf, no one cares. You already paid. You walk off the course, no big deal. Maybe you drive your buddies home. Okay, well, that's not politics. You don't get to walk out on politics, okay? It's a boxing match. The other guy is still whooping your butt. You don't get to say, I'm done in the middle of the boxing match, because I got news for you. They're not done with you. Make your voice heard. These are your kids in this serious situation, that if this degenerates again into a second and third order proxy fight here, these are your kids, my kids. I have 2 daughters. I mean, who thought we'd still be in Afghanistan? My daughter's 9. Folks, you have the real power, not them. The let them eat cake crowd in D.C., I'm not even tired of them. Like I said, I'm tired of being tired of them. These guys don't want to listen to us, and ladies. It's like they treat us like a bunch of pawns in a chess game, and they just randomly, it reminds me of that Clash of the Titans. Remember that, Jeff? Clash of the Titans? The first one, not the second. I wasn't thinking the second one at all. Remember that with Harry, was it Harry Hamlin? Is that his name? Yeah, Lisa Rinna's husband. And Zeus, and they're moving these little characters around. I mean, folks, I think that's what a lot of American people feel like right now. Well, take it back. You have to do something. Action matters. Talk is cheap. I hope you like the show. I really do. But, folks, it's talk. If it doesn't motivate you to do something, call your reps. I worked in the White House when I was during my time in the Secret Service there. I guarantee you start calling that White House switchboard, you are going to make a difference. I guarantee it. All right, we got a few minutes left in the show. Let's get to a couple calls here. Let's go to Chad in D.C. Chad, you're on with Dan Bongino. What do you got for us? Chad, you there?
Yes, sir.
All right, what do you got for us?
I just wanted to throw this out there. I don't know if anybody's thinking about this way, but maybe the whole game plan for the president is to take it to Congress, have them deny it, so he can turn around and say, I tried to do the right thing. The Republicans told me no. That way, if anything goes south, he's not to blame.
Well, Chad, you bring up an interesting point. Like, the president's political capital is nil. No one believes him on the IRS. Nobody believes him on Benghazi. No one even believes him on the EPA not charging conservative groups when they were knocking the price down for liberal groups, subpoenaing information. I mean, no one believes this guy. And I think you bring up an interesting point. And thanks for the call, that political capital, folks, is a very real thing. It's like a bank account. I mean, he squandered it, the president. Nobody believes him anymore. I mean, the American public, over, 60% in that last poll, thinks he's not telling the truth on Benghazi. The IRS thing's still going on. Jenny Beth Martin from Tea Party Patriots was on Fox the other day. They're still being targeted. And the Dems are like, hey, you know what? We're just going to carry water for the president. It's cool. They're not really targeting us. Really? Well, I'll tell you what. I don't care if if the president was a Republican or whatever the label in front of his name is. When the president of the United States and his administration is actively targeting Americans using the IRS you paid for, troubling folks, he's losing political capital by the minute. Support for this potential engagement in Syria is at about, 7%? Very dangerous, folks. But again, you have the power. These guys will listen, but you gotta shake them up. You gotta call. You gotta show up at the town hall meetings. You gotta let your voice be heard. Make a respectful argument, but don't be silenced. There is power in now. Remember, you can change tomorrow. Okay, yesterday's over. We got to stop complaining about it, especially us on the conservative side. Folks, it's been a great show. I really appreciate it. I'm Dan Bongino. It's always been an honor to fill in behind this mic here. So you can follow me on Twitter at DBongino if you'd like. You can also follow me on Facebook. You can like my page, Dan.Bongino.